Chapter 141, Spring Break, 3. My thoughts swirled like a tempest as I pieced together the implications of what I'd just learned. Swordsmanship talent grades. It wasn't something that had been touched upon in the saga of the Divine Swordsman. At least, not explicitly. But now, standing here in the heart of Mount Hua and getting the fragments of information from Master Li and Seraphina, it clicked into place. This wasn't just about how good you were with a sword. It wasn't about how many hours you'd spent drenched in sweat and blood on a training field. This was something far more unfair. Something far more innate. Something more absolute. Talent. Pure, unalterable talent. A grade 5 talent meant you had the potential to create a grade 5 art. Not just master it, not just refine it, but create it, something entirely your own, a unique mark on the world of swordsmanship. The creation of arts, as it turned out, was less about skill and more about the genetic and mystical hand you'd been dealt by the universe. The cold, unyielding hierarchy of talent dictated what heights you could reach, no matter how hard you worked. In an already unfair world, this was the most damning blow. Even those with skill, grit, and relentless drive could hit a wall they would never break through. Talent, it seemed, was the unscalable mountain that those without could only look up at from below. And now, I had confirmation of my place on that mountain. Grade 6 talent. The very same grade as Lucifer Windward. The very same as the Martial King himself. A talent so rare that it reshaped the air in the room just by existing. Li's words echoed in my head. Grade 6 talent. I felt the weight of those 3 words settle over me. A grade 6 swordsmanship talent wasn't just an acknowledgement of skill. It was a declaration. It meant I had the capacity to create a grade 6 art or even evolve an existing one to heights no one else could imagine. Li rubbed his chin thoughtfully, muttering more to himself than to me. No, in terms of pure talent, you might be better than even Sunday. Sun Zenith. Seraphina's adopted brother. The prodigy of Mount Hua adopted by the sect leader when he was but a child orphan. A swordsman who had once been hailed as the future of the sect and the holder of grade 6 talent. Even called the Divine Dragon of Mount Hua in the novel. But according to Li Zenith, his own uncle, no less, I surpassed even him. That was the thing about grades, wasn't it? They gave you the general shape of someone's potential, but there were still layers within those grades. Just because Sun and I both had grade 6 talent didn't mean we were equals. There were still levels to this. Li studied me like one might study a curious artifact. His gaze was equal parts awe and scrutiny. He wasn't just seeing a student anymore, he was seeing potential. Possibility. A spark that could ignite into something unstoppable. I tightened my grip on the wooden sword at my side, the reality of it all sinking in. My father, for all his strength and guidance, likely hadn't possessed more than grade 4 talent. After all, if he had even grade 5 talent, he would have been able to elevate his grade 4 art to grade 5. The leap from that to this, it wasn't just a small, petty difference. It was absurd. Absurd. That was the only word for it. Well then, Li began, stroking his chin as if weighing the cosmos on his fingertips. You want to create a grade 6 art out of that light mana spell of yours, don't you? It's ambitious. But, his lips curled into a small smirk, you must have realized by now that keeping it in spell form is limiting. Exactly, I said, nodding. The frustration of it had been gnawing at me for weeks. A spell, no matter how powerful, was always tethered to its circle count and casting limitations. But a movement within a grade 6 art? That would transcend those boundaries entirely, bringing fluidity, adaptability, and far more destructive power. Ridiculous spellcasting talent on top of that, an affinity for both dark and light magic, Li muttered, shaking his head like he was trying to piece me together. Honestly, Seraphina, you've dragged an absolute anomaly to Mount Hua. Seraphina, standing quietly to the side, just tilted her head in response, as though this was the most ordinary thing in the world. Li sighed, a sound that carried both exasperation and a begrudging kind of admiration. I have no choice, do I? Someone like you, if I don't take you as my disciple, I'd be insulting the heavens. My chest tightened, and for a brief moment, I could feel the weight of what he'd just said. A high immortal rank swordsman of Mount Hua, the greatest swordsman sect in the world, had just offered to take me under his wing. "Thank you, master," I said, bowing low, the words coming out with a rare sincerity I couldn't suppress. "All right then," he said, clapping his hands together, his tone immediately shifting to one of amusement. "You've signed up for Mount Hua training now, boy. Let's see if you can handle it without crying to Sarah." Serafina shot him a flat look, the barest flicker of warmth in her silver eyes. "But," Lee continued, waving a hand toward the distant training fields, "before we throw you into the grinder, let's sit down and have a chat. We'll discuss the theory behind how to turn that flashy god flash of yours into something worthy of a grade 6 art. Follow me." He led me and Serafina through a maze of winding stone paths, past courtyards where disciples were sparring under the watchful eyes of their elders. The sounds of clashing swords and shouted instructions echoed through the air, a symphony of discipline and ambition. Finally, we arrived at a modest room, sparsely furnished with a low table and cushions. "All right, Serafina," Lee said, turning to her, "off you go. This is between me and your friend." Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, searching, before she nodded and slipped out the door without a word. Lee took a seat, gesturing for me to do the same. "Now then," he said, leaning forward, his tone losing its usual lightness. "Grade 6 arts. Let me tell you something, Arthur. These aren't just techniques. They're monuments to talent." I nodded, already sensing where he was going. The weight of the word talent had been looming over me ever since I'd arrived here. "Talent," he said, his voice almost a whisper now, "is the single most important thing in this world. It doesn't care about effort. It doesn't care about how many sleepless nights you've spent training or how much blood you've spilled. In the face of true talent, hard work is meaningless. Talent makes hard work useless." The words hit like a hammer, and yet they resonated. I'd heard something similar before, from Professor Gravemore, when he spoke of summoning sentient undead, the pinnacle of necromancy. The wall of talent, he'd called it. An insurmountable barrier that separated the chosen few from everyone else. And now, here it was again, casting its shadow over swordsmanship. "The wall of talent," I muttered under my breath, more to myself than to him. Lee raised an eyebrow, then nodded. "Exactly. And yet, you've somehow scaled that wall without breaking a sweat. Grade 6 swordsmanship talent. That's a gift so rare, it changes the rules of the game." He leaned back, his gaze sharpening. "But don't let that go to your head. Talent alone won't make this easy. Especially not with what you're trying to do." I straightened, my focus sharpening as he continued. "Since you're aiming to turn God Flash into a movement for a grade 6 art, you'll need to understand what separates an art from a spell. Spells are constructs of mana, rigid, structured, bound by their circle. Movements, however, are tied to the essence of the body and soul. They transcend the rigid framework of mana. They're alive." He tapped the table between us, his finger punctuating each word. "Body and soul. Those are the two aspects you'll need to focus on. The mind aspect can take a back seat here, it's important, but not the crux of the art." I nodded, absorbing his words like a sponge. "How do I start?" Lee's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Patience. First, we'll break down your God Flash. You'll need to reimagine it, not as a spell, but as an extension of yourself. A movement that compounds not with mana, but with your intent, your breath, your will." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "And that, Arthur, is where the real challenge begins. Are you ready?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words, the weight of the task ahead. "I'm ready." Chapter 142, Spring Break, 4. Creating a grade 6 art was like trying to compose a symphony on a broken piano in the middle of a relentless hurricane. The wind of logic and precision battered you from every side, demanding method and technique, while the howling storm of raw, unbridled creativity threatened to tear your careful plans to shreds. It wasn't a matter of cold equations or tidy scribbles on parchment, though those had their place. No, it demanded something more elusive. Imagination. Not just the dreamy, whimsical kind, though that played its part. This was imagination harnessed by discipline, shaped by intent, and fueled by raw emotion. It wasn't enough to dream, you had to believe in that dream, feel it coil around your identity until it became inseparable from who you were, until its shape and form were yours, not borrowed from someone else's story. That was where I was hopelessly stuck. Because if I was honest, Godflash wasn't really mine. In the original novel, it had been Lucifer's crowning technique, his creation, his triumph. I'd plucked it off the page like a thief at a bazaar, filching his masterpiece for my own. I'd altered it here and there, replacing the original lightning magic with light magic, nudging its structure to fit my constraints, but in the end, it remained a borrowed blade, not something shaped from the fires of my own soul. If I wanted to elevate it into the opening movement of a true grade 6 art, I had to do more than bolt on a few modifications. I needed to reforge it, reimagine it, invest it with my blood, sweat, and will until it belonged to me in a way no stolen technique ever could. That was why I was here, sitting on a rock, clad in swim trunks, with my arms folded against the bitter cold. A picturesque scene on paper, maybe something out of a holiday postcard, if you missed the crucial detail that the waterfall looming above me was trying to kill me. And by waterfall, I really mean a thundering torrent that felt more like a manic fortress of water, aimed straight at my skull. The roar of it was deafening, a ceaseless percussion that hammered against my shoulders and threatened to send me sprawling into the churning pool below. My teeth wouldn't stop chattering, my spine ached from bracing against the onslaught, and my spirit felt like it was being crushed under the endless cascade. According to Master Li, I wasn't allowed to leave until I realized it. In a moment of naive desperation, I'd asked him what it meant, hoping for a crisp definition, some neat puzzle to solve. His answer? You'll know when you know. Brilliant. Profound. And about as helpful as a locked door without a key. So, there I perched, half frozen under a waterfall from hell, each droplet pummeling me like a fistful of iron pellets. Time stretched in an endless now, the hours merging into a gray haze. My mind felt like it was stuffed with soaking cotton. I clung to one single thought to keep me from succumbing to the punishing cold. How do I make Godflash truly mine? Nothing about this was glamorous or heroic. The water hammered me from above, goosebumps rippling across my skin, reminding me how fragile a human body can be in the face of nature's relentless force. My breath came in shallow gasps, chest locked in a frigid vice. The moment I let my focus slip, the waterfall threatened to send me headlong into the swirling pool. Yet I remained, because for better or worse, I believed there was something down this path, something intangible I needed to find. It's not about speed, I murmured through numb lips, my voice promptly drowned by the waterfall's roar. Not just about light mana, either. It's about a single, perfect moment. A reason. Yet the words felt hollow, like lines from a script I'd rehearsed too many times. Intent, focus, single motion, these had all become catchphrases, repeated so often that they lost their meaning. I tried to conjure images, the brilliance of a star slicing through the dark, the edge of a blade cleaving the horizon, the unstoppable push of my will. But each image crumbled away under the water's relentless pounding, leaving me with half-formed ideas that dissipated as fast as they arose. I found my thoughts drifting, inevitably, to Lucifer, the original creator of Godflash in the novel. He hadn't gained it by quiet reflection or waterfall meditation. He'd earned it in the crucible of battle, forging it under the heat of necessity and brilliance. That was the difference, wasn't it? Necessity. He created it because he had to, because at that moment, there was no alternative. So what drove me? Necessity or convenience? Did I truly need to shape Godflash into a grade 6 art, or was I just chasing a storyline that wasn't really mine? A fresh wave of water slammed against my neck, making me gasp as I refocused on staying upright. The waterfall felt like an extension of Master Li's lessons, merciless, unyielding. Perhaps that was the entire point, to beat my mind into stillness until something genuine emerged. I forced my eyes shut, letting the brutal cold become a sort of meditative anchor. No matter how my thoughts spun, the water provided a reality check, a tangible impetus to keep me grounded. Gradually, the roar receded from my conscious awareness. My mind slipped into a slower rhythm. My body ached, but in that pain, I found a fragile clarity. I pictured God flash in its earliest form, Lucifer executing it with unstoppable confidence, his blazing arcs of lightning unstoppable. In my version, I'd replaced that lightning with light manna. But it remained an imitation, a shell. So what was I missing? The why. A technique of that caliber wasn't about raw stats or arcane geometry. It was about the reason you moved, the conviction behind the blade, the undeniable intention that made the motion inevitable. A single, perfect instant of will. God Flash soared beyond a mere demonstration of speed or brilliance. It was a testament to need, to a moment when the swordsman's entire being demanded the move exist. And so, here I was, pinned under a killer waterfall to discover my need. Because Lucifer's reasons were never mine. My need couldn't be cribbed from the novel's pages. I had to find my own impetus, my own reason to shape the moment into a new grade 6 art. Time slurred again, the hours morphing into a singular, punishing blur. My teeth chattered uncontrollably now, limbs close to numb. The constant barrage on my spine felt like each drop was a tiny hammer. My mind swam in circles. The fleeting clarity I'd grasped kept slipping away, replaced by a creeping despair. What if I can't do it? What if Lucifer was always meant to have it, and I'm just a thief who can't harness it fully? Eventually, my eyes drifted shut, more from overwhelming fatigue than deliberate choice. The cacophony dulled, as if I floated somewhere deeper inside. The cold, the pain, the tension, none of it vanished, but for a moment, it all felt quieter. Like my heart had found a slower rhythm amid the storm. Arthur. The voice sliced through that half-dream state with alarming clarity, like a blade through mist. My eyes snapped open, disoriented. The waterfall roared on, but my hearing felt dulled. My mind spun, uncertain of reality. Then I glimpsed her silhouette near the edge of the crashing water, Seraphina. She stood just beyond the waterfall's direct onslaught, the arcs of water spraying against her arms. "Arthur, it's dark," she said, her words cutting through the noise. "You've been here all day." Confusion flashed in my mind. Was it night already? My body felt so battered I'd lost track of the sun's position hours ago. "You need to stop," she insisted, stepping closer, the swirling mist soaking her coat. Her usual calm voice carried an undertone of exasperation. "Come back to the sect and rest." I blinked slowly, trying to piece my scrambled thoughts together. The bone-deep cold told me I was well past my limit. And yet, a stubborn flicker of defiance lit in my chest. What if the revelation was just a moment away? But the truth was stark, I was on the edge of collapse. Pushing further might break me before I discovered anything meaningful. Reluctantly, I gave a faint nod. My trembling arms uncoiled from my sides. The moment I tried to stand, pain knifed through my lower back, and my legs wobbled precariously on the slick rock. I pitched forward, half blinded by swirling water, until Seraphina caught my shoulder with a steady hand. She cursed under her breath, a rare show of frustration. "You're an idiot," she muttered, voice quavering with a mix of anger and concern. "Staying out here so long. You'll freeze or drown or both." I managed a shivering laugh. I lost track of time. She let out a huff that might have been amusement or annoyance. Clearly. Her grip on my arm was firm but careful, guiding me off the rock. I nearly tripped at the final step, the force of the waterfall still tugging at me, but Seraphina yanked me back from the edge. Once out of the waterfall's direct fury, the cold air hit me differently, sending violent shudders through my body. My mind felt hazy, eyelids heavy. But a small spark lingered inside me. Something had stirred under that onslaught, a flicker of comprehension about forging God Flash anew. Not a full revelation, not a triumphant eureka, but a seed that might grow. Serafina, noticing my distant gaze, frowned. Don't tell me you're still fixated on that technique in this condition, she snapped, though the softness in her eyes belied her harsh tone. Come on. Let's get you warmed up before you destroy yourself. Chapter 143, Spring Break, 5. It was a pleasant night. A pleasant full moon night, the kind that poets might write sonnets about and painters might ruin by trying too hard. The moon hung fat and luminous in the sky, spilling its light over Mount Hua like a generous drunk with a bottle of the good stuff. Li sipped his tea, a slow, deliberate gesture that mirrored the steady rhythm of his thoughts. The droplet of tea bloomed on his tongue, the intricate flavor unfolding like a delicate manna-infused flower. Plum blossom tea, Mount Hua's signature blend, brewed from leaves so rare they could bankrupt small nations if auctioned. He savored it. Not just the tea, but the quiet. A moment to himself. Which, predictably, did not last. Uncle. Serafina's voice cut through the serenity like a blade through silk. The door slid open with a sharp snap, and she marched in, arms folded, her silver hair catching the moonlight as it fanned behind her. Sarah, Li greeted her with a soft smile, entirely unbothered by the intrusion. He placed his cup down with care, as if acknowledging her arrival didn't mean abandoning his tea. Why are you bullying Arthur? She demanded, her gaze as sharp as her tone. Li raised an eyebrow, tilting his head in that maddeningly calm way he always did. I'm not bullying him. You sent him to waterfall training for an entire day, she countered, her arms folding tighter. If that's not bullying, I don't know what is. Li chuckled, a deep, warm sound that filled the room like a rolling wave. Sarah, bullying is when someone does something with malicious intent. What I'm doing is mentorship. Mentorship? Serafina echoed, her tone dripping with skepticism. He's sitting under freezing water for hours. That's not mentorship, that's borderline torture. Li delicately set his teacup down, his movements precise and unhurried, as though the conversation required no urgency. He studied her for a moment, his gaze softening. You've changed, he said, his voice contemplative. What? Serafina blinked, the accusation catching her off guard. You've changed, he repeated. You're standing here, arguing with me, not because you disagree with my methods but because you're worried about him. Her expression wavered for a fraction of a second before she steeled herself. I'm not worried. Li's smile grew wider, a knowing glint in his dark eyes. You like him, don't you? I don't, she shot back, the reply so quick it practically tripped over itself. Li's laugh was a deep rumble, rich with amusement. Sarah, you're a terrible liar. But don't worry. I'm not one to meddle in the affairs of young lovebirds. Serafina sputtered, her cheeks darkening slightly. That's not the point. And I don't like him. Of course not, Li said smoothly, though his tone said otherwise. He picked up his teacup again, taking another slow sip as Serafina glared daggers at him. But I'm still asking, she pressed, her voice sharp. Why are you making him go through that? Surely there's a better way. Li sighed, setting his tea down again with a quiet clink. His gaze grew distant for a moment, as though he were looking past her, past the room, into some distant memory or thought. When I met him, Li began, I realized something. His talent. In terms of pure absorption and purification of mana, it's much lower than yours. Serafina frowned, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. That's not possible, she murmured, almost to herself. He's a high silver ranker, and he reached that before I did. Exactly, Li nodded, the movement slow and deliberate. And there's only one way that's possible. He's the kind of genius who becomes a diamond under pressure. The type who thrives on desperation, on adversity. For someone like him, a perfect, safe environment is wasted. He doesn't grow in the sunlight. He grows in the storm. Serafina's eyes narrowed. And this storm is necessary because he won't form a grade 6 art the normal way, Li said simply. He doesn't need protection. He needs resistance. He needs to fight, to struggle, to be pushed past what he thinks he can endure. That's where his talent shines. If I coddle him, if I make it easy, he'll never reach the heights he's capable of. He'll never realize what he's truly made of. Serafina's lips pressed into a thin line, her expression thoughtful. And you're sure that's the only way? Lee smiled again, softer this time. It's not about what's easiest, Sarah. It's about what's right. For him, this is right. Trust me on that. She exhaled sharply, her gaze dropping for a moment before she met his eyes again. Fine. But if I find out you're pushing him too hard, you'll come storming into my room again, no doubt, Lee interrupted, his grin widening. Don't worry, Sarah. I'm not trying to break him. I'm trying to make him unbreakable. Lee watched Serafina leave, her silver hair catching the moonlight in a way that made her look almost ethereal. Don't hurt him, she'd said, folding her arms like a stern schoolmaster reprimanding a student. Lee chuckled softly to himself as he gazed out the open window, the night air cool against his skin. The moon hung heavy and luminous in the sky, casting its silver glow over Mount Hua's peaks. I would never hurt a genius, Sarah, he murmured to the night. His words, though quiet, carried weight. But sometimes, to forge a blade that's sharp, you have to temper it in fire and ice. Underscore 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 underscore. The second day of waterfall training began much like the first, with me questioning my life choices. I sat beneath the crushing torrent of water, the sheer force of it pressing down on me like the weight of a collapsing building. Each droplet felt like a hammer, and the sound of the waterfall was deafening, an endless roar that drowned out everything else. My body ached in places I didn't even know could ache, and my mind felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. According to Master Lee, this was where I was supposed to find clarity. Somewhere in the chaos, the noise, the sheer discomfort, was an epiphany waiting to be grasped. Epiphany, conceptualization, application. A neat little process, on paper. In practice? It felt like trying to catch a slippery fish with bare hands while blindfolded. The problem wasn't the waterfall itself, it was my own mind. Thoughts swirled in my head like the water crashing around me. I replayed every battle, every mistake, every fleeting moment of insight. God Flash. The technique I wanted to evolve. The technique that wasn't truly mine yet. I needed to make it mine. Not Lucifer's, not a relic of someone else's imagination, but something that resonated with me. Something born from my own struggles, my own vision. But how? Reimagine it, I muttered to myself, though the words were swallowed by the roar of the water. Easier said than done. Every time I tried to picture the technique, it came back to me as it had always been, Lucifer's creation, reworked slightly with light mana but still fundamentally his. My hands clenched into fists, the cold water biting into my skin. I could feel frustration building in my chest, a tight knot that refused to loosen. How was I supposed to reimagine something when every frame of it was burned into my memory? Focus, I told myself. Strip it down. What is God Flash at its core? Speed. Precision. Devastation. A movement so fast it transcended sight, so precise it left no room for error, so devastating it ended battles in an instant. That was the essence of it. But what did that mean to me? What was my interpretation of speed, precision, devastation? I closed my eyes, trying to block out the cold, the noise, the ache in my muscles. Images flickered in my mind, moments from the past, from battles, from training. The feeling of light mana coursing through me, sharp and radiant. The exhilaration of pushing past my limits. The moment in the fight against Arkel where I stepped into the jaws of death and came out alive. That was it. That was the feeling I needed to capture. Not just speed, but the courage to move forward when every instinct screamed at you to stop. Not just precision, but the clarity of knowing that one perfect strike could change everything. Not just devastation, but the will to stand against overwhelming odds and carve out a path with your own hands. I opened my eyes, the water blurring my vision. I was close. I could feel it, just out of reach, like the faint glow of a distant star. But no matter how hard I tried to grasp it, it slipped through my fingers. I exhaled, the breath shaky and uneven. The cold was starting to seep into my bones now, a dull ache that refused to be ignored. My hands trembled, not from fear or exhaustion, but from the sheer effort of holding on. And then I heard her voice. Arthur. It cut through the roar of the waterfall like a blade, sharp and clear. My head snapped up, my vision still hazy from the water, and I blinked rapidly to clear my eyes. Arthur, Seraphina's voice came again, closer this time, laced with a rare note of concern. I looked at her, and the sight of her made me gasp. Chapter 144, Spring Break 6. Seraphina was sitting at the very edge of the cliff, her legs dangling lazily above the churning waters below. The moonlight bathed her in silver, accentuating every curve, every strand of her ethereal hair that shimmered like spun moonlight. And then there was her swimsuit, a simple bikini that somehow managed to seem regal on her, as if the very concept of swimwear had been invented just for her use. I froze mid-step. My brain short-circuited. For the first time in a long while, I genuinely questioned the legality of something. Because surely looking this good in front of me, of all people, had to break some sort of natural law. Her presence was disarming. I'd grown used to being around beautiful people. Rachel and Cecilia weren't exactly slouches in the looks department. But Seraphina wasn't just beautiful, she was otherworldly. The kind of beauty that knocked the air out of your lungs and left you wondering how the hell the universe had sculpted such a person. And the worst part? She was completely unaware of it. You're staring, she said without even glancing my way, her voice cool and unbothered, but her head tilted ever so slightly to catch me in the corner of her gaze. My face heated instantly. I turned away so fast it was a miracle I didn't give myself whiplash. I wasn't staring. I heard her soft chuckle, and when I dared to look again, I caught the faintest pink on her cheeks. Seraphina Zenith. Blushing. For a fleeting moment, I felt like I'd witnessed something that no mortal ever had before. You're staring again, I said, trying to wrestle some semblance of control back into the conversation. So what? She replied, entirely unfazed. Her eyes didn't leave mine, though there was a tiny smirk playing on her lips. What are you going to do about it? I gave up. There was no winning here. With a sigh, I jumped down from my perch under the waterfall, using a soft burst of wind magic to guide my fall. I landed next to her as lightly as I could manage, though the uneven ground still made me stumble slightly. Seraphina, of course, didn't even flinch. So, I began, sitting beside her and letting my legs dangle into the abyss below. Did the Princess of Mount Hua fancy a swim tonight? Perhaps, she said, her tone as elusive as ever. In water that cold? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She turned her head slightly, her silver hair catching the moonlight in a way that almost made me forget what I'd asked. I'm a half-elf, Arthur, she said simply. My mother was the princess of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. I'm more used to the cold than you'll ever be. Ah, right. That made sense. Mount Hua was already cold, but the water from this waterfall? It was liquid frostbite. To her, though, it probably felt like a mildly refreshing bath. We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the waterfall roaring in the background. The moon hung heavy and luminous above us, casting the entire cliffside in shades of silver and gray. It was peaceful, in a way that felt almost unreal. "Why are you pushing yourself so hard?" she asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Her voice was softer than usual, almost tentative. "Because I need to," I replied automatically, my gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Arthur." Her tone sharpened, and I felt her shift beside me. Before I could react, she leaned in close, too close. Her face was just inches from mine, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. I instinctively leaned back, though there was nowhere to go. "Serafina," I stammered, my voice cracking slightly. Her scent hit me then, warm and sweet, like honey on a summer morning. It was a smell I'd noticed before, faintly lingering around her, but here, with her so close, it was overwhelming. Distracting. "Tell me," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I want to know." I swallowed hard. Her eyes were so piercing, so unrelenting, that for a moment, I felt like she could see right through me. My heart pounded in my chest, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it. "Serafina," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "See, can we, maybe establish some boundaries here?" She blinked, as if just realizing how close she was, and leaned back to her original position. Her face betrayed nothing, but I thought I caught the faintest twitch of amusement at the corner of her lips. "You get flustered too easily," she remarked, brushing a strand of silver hair over her shoulder. "Well, forgive me for being human," I muttered under my breath, though the heat in my cheeks probably ruined whatever dignity I had left. She didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed once more on the moonlit horizon. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable but charged with something I couldn't quite name. "Arthur," she said eventually, her voice softer now, almost contemplative. "Why do you push yourself so hard? Really?" I glanced at her, unsure how to answer. But then I saw her expression, not cold, not distant, but genuine. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't asking because she was curious, or because she felt obligated. She was asking because she cared. "I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice low. "Maybe because I feel like I have to. Like if I don't, I'll fall behind. Or worse, I'll lose something I can't get back." She didn't respond immediately, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't quite place. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I see," she said quietly, her voice carrying an unfamiliar softness, like the edge of a blade wrapped in silk. Then, without warning, she added, "So you're a crazy bastard." I blinked, caught off guard by her choice of words. "I'd prefer you didn't call me that." "Crazy bastard," she repeated, almost as if testing how it sounded in the air. Her ice blue eyes narrowed, and she folded her arms like a disapproving elder sister. "I don't care how crazy you are, Arthur. Stop hurting yourself." Her words struck harder than I expected, heavier than the waterfall that had battered me all day. There was no mocking edge, no detached curiosity, just something raw and unfiltered, something almost protective. I turned to face her, unsure how to respond. "I'm not." "Don't lie," she cut me off, her tone sharp enough to slice through steel. "You think I don't see it? The way you throw yourself at danger, the way you push past your limits like they don't exist. Do you think that makes you strong?" "It's necessary," I said, a bit more defensively than I intended. "It's reckless," she snapped, leaning forward, her silver hair catching the moonlight like molten mercury. "You're chasing strength like it's the only thing that matters. But what happens when you break yourself in the process? What good is your strength then?" Her words were blunt, cutting, but beneath them, I caught something else. A quiet fear, buried deep but undeniably there. It was strange, hearing that from someone like Serafina, who carried herself like nothing in the world could shake her. I didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, I was speechless. "Become as strong as you want," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But don't hurt yourself to get there. As long as you're not hurt, I don't care." The weight of her words settled over me, heavy and unyielding. I opened my mouth to respond, but she spoke again, her tone softer now, almost contemplative. "You're trying too hard to force it," she said, her gaze drifting to the waterfall. "That's why you haven't figured it out yet." "Figured what out?" I asked, my brow furrowing. She turned to look at me, her ice blue eyes piercing in their clarity. "Your art. God Flash, or whatever you're trying to make it into. You're treating it like a puzzle you can brute force your way through. But a grade 6 art isn't something you can force." I frowned, her words both frustrating and intriguing. "Then what am I supposed to do? Sit around and wait for it to magically come together?" "No," she said simply. "You need to stop fighting it. You're thinking about it like it's a spell, like it has to follow strict rules. But a grade 6 art isn't just a technique, Arthur. It's an expression. A manifestation of who you are, not just what you can do." Her words hit me like a freight train. She wasn't wrong. I had been treating God Flash like a problem to be solved, a formula to be perfected. But an art wasn't a formula. It was something more. Something deeper. Expression. I muttered under my breath, the word lingering in my mind like an echo. She nodded, her gaze steady. "You're trying to make it perfect. But perfection doesn't come from logic or calculations. It comes from feeling." Feeling. The word resonated in my mind, stirring something deep within me. I thought back to the moments when God Flash had felt most natural, most alive. It wasn't when I was overthinking it, breaking it down into steps. It was when I let go. When I trusted myself, my instincts, my sword. "You need to stop chasing the art," she said, her voice almost gentle now. "Let it come to you. Let it breathe. Let it breathe." The pieces didn't just click into place, they snapped together with the clarity of a lightning strike. My thoughts, my instincts, my experiences, they all converged into a single, undeniable truth. My chest tightened, but not with tension. It was a thrill that surged through me, electric and all-consuming. I understood now. Not just the art, but the why of it. Why it had always felt incomplete, why it didn't fully resonate with me before. It wasn't just about speed or precision or power. It was about me. About my journey, my choices, my will to carve out something uniquely mine. I closed my eyes, the waterfall's relentless torrent now a backdrop to the clarity roaring in my mind. God Flash wasn't just a technique, it was an extension of me. A moment that defied hesitation, that thrived on instinct and trust. It was a declaration. A challenge. A refusal to falter, even in the face of overwhelming odds. When I opened my eyes, they burned with purpose. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, resolute. Serafina blinked at me, her cheeks still tinged with the faintest pink. "For what?" "For this," I said, gesturing vaguely at the waterfall, the stars, and her, all of it. "For being here. For saying what I needed to hear." She crossed her arms, her gaze flickering between amusement and embarrassment. "Just don't make me regret helping you, crazy bastard." I chuckled, but it was different now. Lighter. Freed. "You won't." Because I knew. The road ahead wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. If a grade 6 art was an expression of self, then this was my truth. Not Lucifer's. Not anyone else's. Mine. And it always would be. Chapter 145, Spring Break, 7. The Wall of Talent. It was the immutable truth of the world, a silent executioner that spared no one, no matter how hard they worked or how fiercely they dreamed. Talent was the dividing line, the chasm that separated the great from the ordinary, the destined from the forgotten. Lee Zenith knew this better than most. He'd lived it. He'd seen it. When he was young, he'd watched his twin brother leap ahead of him with infuriating ease, carving paths that Lee could only stumble through despite putting in double the hours, double the effort. That was the first lesson. The second came with the martial king. Lee had been there, his brother standing tall and proud, wielding the sword style that was their family's pride. And then, the martial king had crushed it underfoot like a handful of fragile plum blossoms. His brother's pride, their family's legacy, trampled to dust. The third lesson came years later, with son Zenith, the golden prodigy who had arrived at the sect like the first ray of dawn piercing the cold night. A boy who seemed to take the world in his stride, bending it to his will with a smile that said, "This is easy." Lee thought he'd seen it all. He thought he'd made his peace with the wall, with the brutal truth of talent and its unforgiving nature. And then, the world surprised him again. "Master, I did it." Arthur's voice rang out, cutting through the roar of the waterfall. The light mana that had coiled around him dissipated into the air, leaving him standing there, soaked to the bone but radiating a quiet, startling triumph. Lee's breath caught. He felt his heart begin to pound, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. It wasn't the exhilaration of pride or even awe, it was fear. Cold, creeping fear. Talent. No. This wasn't just talent. This was something far more terrifying. Lee's hands trembled as he stared at the boy before him. He tried to clench his fist, to steady himself, but the tremor refused to subside. In 3 days. 3 days. That was all it had taken. Arthur Nightingale had taken a 5-circle spell, an already absurd feat of casting, and transformed it into the first movement of a grade 6 art. Not copied. Not mimicked. Created. Personalized. Made his. Lee Zenith's mouth was dry. He didn't trust himself to speak. His mind was a storm of disbelief, confusion, and the faint whisper of dread. This wasn't normal. This wasn't natural. He'd thought he understood the boy's talent when he saw him wield light and dark mana, when he saw him form both the black star and the white star. But this? This was beyond his understanding. Beyond anything he'd ever witnessed. The prophecy. The words came to him unbidden, crawling out of the recesses of his memory like a serpent. The second hero. The destined figure who would rise, eclipsing all others, to reshape the world. The sect had debated it for years. Some said it was son Zenith, their golden prodigy. Others argued for Renkagu, whose potential defied comprehension. But most had pinned their hopes, and their fears, on Lucifer Windward. The boy whose monstrous talent made even the greatest tremble. But now, as Lee stood there, his hands shaking, his eyes fixed on the boy before him, a thought clawed its way to the surface. What if we were wrong? Arthur looked up at him, his expression calm but filled with a quiet fire. He wasn't boastful. He wasn't arrogant. He didn't need to be. The proof was in the air around him, in the hum of mana still resonating from his body. "Master?" Arthur asked, his voice cutting through Lee's spiraling thoughts. "Is something wrong?" Lee swallowed, his throat dry. For a moment, he couldn't speak. And when he finally did, his voice was quieter than he intended, almost reverent. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Nothing's wrong. You've surpassed every expectation." Arthur tilted his head, clearly confused. "Is that bad?" Lee almost laughed, but it came out more like a shaky exhale. "No," he said again, firmer this time. "It's not bad. It's terrifying." Arthur blinked, but Lee didn't elaborate. He couldn't. The words felt too heavy to voice, the implications too vast to consider. All he could think was that the Sovereign's tournament was fast approaching. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what the outcome would be. The answer would come in the arena. Of that, he was certain. But as he looked at Arthur, standing there with the faint glow of light mana still clinging to him, Lee Zenith couldn't shake the thought that the prophecy had just taken an unexpected turn. Underscore 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 underscore. All right, you may have completed this, but you're not off the hook just yet, Lee said, his grin carrying the distinct air of a man about to drop something arduous into my lap. You've still got a few days here, so I want to teach you something else, something I think will suit you perfectly. What is it? I asked, already wary. Lee's enthusiasm usually meant sweat, tears, and occasionally, questioning my life choices. The grade 3 art, illusion sword, he said, leaning back as if waiting for my reaction. I blinked. Why? Lee raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by my lack of enthusiasm. All right, let me explain, genius, he began, his voice taking on the tone of a patient schoolteacher trying to educate a particularly slow student. Your talent is grade 6. That means anything below grade 6 will come to you faster, smoother. A grade 3 art? You'll breeze through it, at least, compared to anyone else. He paused, letting the words settle. But here's the real kicker. Once you reach the zenith realm of mastery in an art like this, it stops being a card you can pull out of your sleeve. It becomes woven into the very fabric of your swordsmanship. Every stroke, every thrust, every movement of your blade will carry its essence. In short, you won't just be using illusion sword, you'll become it. That caught my attention. Lee's grin widened as he continued, clearly noticing the shift in my expression. The beauty of illusion sword lies in its simplicity. It focuses on creating multiple overlapping mana flows, a technique designed to confuse your enemies. Feints on feints, layers upon layers. The moment someone tries to read your mana flow to anticipate your attack, they're lost. The real strike lands before they even realize they've been fooled. I frowned, the gears in my mind turning. If it's so straightforward, why is it classified as a grade 3 art? Surely it has some catch. Lee's grin turned wolfish. Ah, there it is, the catch. He tapped the hilt of his sword meaningfully. The art is straightforward in concept, but mastering it? That's another beast entirely. It demands exceptional expertise in feints and precision control over mana flow. Most swordsmen struggle to make the technique convincing, let alone seamless. That's why it sits comfortably in the grade 3 bracket, not because it's easy, but because its impact is capped without mastery. I nodded slowly. The explanation made sense. The grades of martial arts weren't just about their effects in battle, they were also about the time, effort, and raw talent required to master them. A grade 5 art could take years to perfect, while a grade 4 art might be mastered in under a year with sufficient dedication. A grade 3 art, for someone like me? Months at most. I could probably master it in 6 weeks, I mused aloud, calculating the time based on my current level of swordsmanship. The rainforest training I'd endured, brutal and unrelenting, had honed my instincts to a razor's edge. Illusion sword would still be a challenge, but not an insurmountable one. Lee nodded approvingly. Exactly. 6 weeks, give or take. And that's why this is perfect for you. While you're refining your new grade 6 movement, this will work in tandem to enhance your base swordsmanship. It's not just about adding another trick to your repertoire, it's about making your swordplay unpredictable on a fundamental level. I frowned, trying to envision how illusion sword would fit into my overall style. My current approach relied heavily on precision and overwhelming power, but unpredictability? That was something I lacked. And in a world where fights were won and lost in the space of a single breath, the ability to deceive was invaluable. Lee leaned forward, his gaze intense. This isn't just about utility, Arthur. It's about laying the groundwork for what's to come. If you want to create a grade 6 art, your swordsmanship needs to evolve. You need layers. Depth. Illusion Sword will give you that. His words struck a chord. The path to greatness wasn't just about raw talent or brute force. It was about growth, adaptation, and understanding. And this? This felt like the next step. All right, I said, meeting his gaze with renewed determination. Let's do it. Chapter 146, Spring Break, 8. I spent the remaining days in Mount Hua catching up on the homework I had barely glanced at before, trading conversations with Seraphina that were increasingly less frosty, at least from her side, and pouring myself into learning Illusion Sword. Time, as it often does when one's hands are full, slipped by without notice, and soon it was time to leave. Standing before Master Li on the morning of our departure, I bowed deeply, my words sincere. Thank you for your teachings, Master. I'll carry everything you taught me with me. Master Li gave me one of his rare, warm smiles, the kind that made you believe, for a fleeting moment, that he wasn't the same man who had subjected you to waterfall training for hours on end. You're my first and only disciple, Arthur. Don't put shame on my name. And make me proud in the Sovereign's tournament, I'll be watching. I won't let you down, I said, the weight of his words settling over me like a mantle. Then, in a move so characteristic of him it bordered on predictable, he leaned in conspiratorially. And take care of Seraphina, all right? She might be cold and blunt, but she cares about you, even if she pretends not to. Uncle. Seraphina's foot shot out in a now-practiced motion, catching his shin with a satisfying thud. Lee grinned, seemingly impervious to her rebuke, while I struggled to hold back a laugh. I know she does, I said, my voice carrying more weight than I intended. I looked at Seraphina and added, I'll take care of her. She stared at me for a moment, her ice blue eyes unreadable, before turning away with an almost imperceptible huff. Without another word, we climbed into the car waiting to take us down the mountain. The journey back mirrored the one that had brought us to Mount Hua, familiar, yet different. A flight, 2 warp gates, and then the increasingly familiar sight of Mythos Academy, perched on its isolated island like a fortress of learning. The transitions felt smoother this time, less like disjointed leaps and more like a natural progression. Or maybe I was just eager to get back. As we neared the academy, Seraphina broke the comfortable silence that had settled between us. I hope your visit to Mount Hua met your expectations, she said, her voice calm but with an undertone of curiosity. It did, I said, turning to face her. Though I didn't get to meet many people there. Your uncle was really the only one I interacted with. Her expression softened slightly. That was intentional. You're not an official disciple of Mount Hua. You don't practice our sex arts. If you had met others, there might have been complications. Complications? I raised an eyebrow. Envy, she said simply, as though that explained everything. And it did, really. I blinked at her, genuinely surprised by her foresight. You thought that far ahead? She turned her head away, her silver hair catching the light in a way that made it look almost luminescent. I didn't want you to deal with anything unnecessary. Thanks, Sarah, I said, the nickname slipping out before I could think twice. I'm glad I came. She turned back to me, her head tilting slightly. Sarah? Can I call you that? I asked, scratching the back of my neck. I wasn't sure why I felt nervous about it. Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, barely there but unmistakable. If it pleases you. It did, more than I cared to admit. By the time we reached the academy, the sun had dipped low in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink. The warp gate left us just outside the sprawling grounds, and the sight of the familiar architecture, the sleek lines and towering spires, brought a strange sense of relief. As much as I'd gained from Mount Hua, there was something comforting about returning to the place where it all began. Back to the grindstone, huh? Luna's voice echoed in my mind, the first time she'd spoken since we left Mount Hua. "You've been quiet lately," I replied, mentally shrugging as we walked through the gates. "I'm not much help when it comes to swordsmanship," she said. "Besides, I figured you needed the silence to focus. But now that we're back, let's talk about the real elephant in the room. White rank. You're close, aren't you?" "Very close," I admitted. As Serafina and I reached the Ophelia dorm, she turned to me, her gaze steady. "Train hard. The Sovereign's tournament isn't far off. I don't expect you to embarrass Mount Hua." I grinned. "I wouldn't dare." She nodded once, her usual composed self, before disappearing into her floor. I watched her go, feeling the weight of her words settle alongside the expectations of everyone else I'd encountered recently. White rank. A grade 6 art. The Lich. The Sovereign's tournament. Everything was falling into place. Not entirely there yet, mind you. The pieces weren't aligned perfectly, but I could feel the shape of it now. Like the hum of a string instrument tuned just a hair too tight, the tension was almost unbearable, but the music it promised to unleash was tantalizing. Ever since that moment, the epiphany that pulled the threads of my grade 6 art together, I'd felt the change within me. A shift so subtle at first, I'd mistaken it for exhaustion. But now, it roared like a storm held just beneath my skin. I was closer to white rank than ever, each breath feeling heavier with the weight of potential. The others wouldn't understand. Rachel might cheer me on, Cecilia would make some snarky remark about my sheer audacity, Rose would shake her head with that wry smile of hers, and Serafina, she'd just tilt her head and mutter, "Crazy bastard," as though it were both an insult and a compliment. They all saw parts of me, but none of them felt this. The sheer need to ascend. To purify. To push. By the time I reached my room, my chest was tight with anticipation. The door slid shut behind me with the soft hiss of modern hydraulics, sealing me into the quiet sanctuary. The room was stark, functional, but it was mine. And tonight, it would witness something extraordinary. I sat cross-legged on the mat in the center of the room, the familiar hum of mana flowing through my veins like a second pulse. My breathing slowed, each inhale drawing in the ambient mana around me, each exhale releasing impurities. My hands rested on my knees, palms up, as I focused inward. The core. My silver core shimmered faintly in the depths of my consciousness, encased in that thin, unyielding layer. The casing was a cage, and it had served its purpose, but it was time to break free. Time to ascend. I began the purification. The process was painstaking, like trying to filter light through a diamond. I pulled in mana, layer by layer, and pushed it through the core. Each cycle stripped away the imperfections, the impurities. It wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. Every fiber of my being had to be aligned, or the process would fail. The casing resisted, as it always did. It wasn't malevolent, just stubborn, like the last stone in a river's path. I grit my teeth, my focus narrowing further. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, charged with an unseen energy. Sweat trickled down my temples as the resistance increased, the core pushing back against my will. But I wouldn't stop. I couldn't. The room grew brighter, not from the artificial lighting, but from the glow emanating from within me. The silver core was reacting now, trembling under the weight of my mana, my resolve. It wasn't just about force, it was about precision. Each thread of mana had to be perfectly aligned, perfectly directed. The casing cracked. A soundless fracture echoed in my mind, and I gasped. The resistance wavered, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I pushed harder, pouring everything into the process. My hands trembled, my body aching under the strain, but I refused to stop. Crack. The fracture deepened, light spilling through the cracks like the first rays of dawn piercing a storm. My heart pounded, the rhythm syncing with the pulsing glow of the core. This was it, the moment. The wall between silver and white was crumbling, and I was tearing through it. With a final surge of effort, the casing shattered. The light was blinding, a radiant explosion that filled my entire being. The silver core dissolved, replaced by a pristine, shining white core. It was smooth, flawless, and it hummed with a power that felt alien yet familiar. My breath caught in my throat as the weight of it settled within me, the purity of the mana coursing through my veins unlike anything I'd ever felt. I opened my eyes, the world around me sharper, clearer, more vivid than before. The air seemed lighter, the sounds crisper. I flexed my fingers, feeling the surge of power at my command. White rank. I was there. A laugh bubbled up unbidden, not of arrogance but of sheer relief. The journey to this point had been grueling, but standing, or rather, sitting, on this new plateau, I knew it had been worth every moment. Chapter 147, Lich, 1. The spring break had come to an end, and as I sprawled out on my bed, a wild grin stretched across my face. Satisfaction coursed through me, every inch of my body buzzing with the sheer accomplishment of the past weeks. The shining white core within me pulsed gently, a quiet reminder of the barrier I'd shattered. I had half a mind to head straight to the training grounds, eager to test the new power surging through me. The temptation gnawed at me like an itch, but I stopped myself at Luna's firm interjection. "Hey, idiot," her voice rang in my mind, sharp as ever. "Do you realize you've done it again?" "Done what?" I asked innocently, although deep down, I already had an inkling of what she was about to say. "You pushed yourself too far, too fast," she said, her tone carrying the weariness of someone forced to lecture a particularly stubborn child. "Do you even understand how reckless that was?" "I don't think it was that reckless," I countered, trying and failing to sound convincing. "I'm still in one piece, aren't I?" "Barely," she shot back. "You rushed to white rank way before your talent should have allowed it. You're lucky you didn't burn yourself out completely. You're talented, sure, but not that talented." Her words struck a chord. She wasn't wrong. The talent of this body, Arthur Nightingale, wasn't naturally suited for such rapid advancement. I had forced it, pushing through sheer desperation and grit, brushing shoulders with death itself to carve out this new strength. It was my modus operandi, but even I knew I was stretching the limits of what was sustainable. "We still had time," Luna continued, softer now but no less insistent. "Why rush like that?" "You weren't ready." I mulled over her question. Time. Yes, I had time. The Sovereign's tournament wasn't for another 2 months. On paper, there was no need to push myself so aggressively. And yet, something in me had felt the urgency. A shadow of unease that I couldn't quite explain. A sense that the world, ever unpredictable, would soon throw something new at me. "Call it instinct," I finally replied, though even I wasn't entirely sure what had driven me. Luna sighed, a long-suffering sound. "Instinct or not, just don't kill yourself before you actually get to prove anything, all right?" The next day, I made my way to class. The moment I stepped into the room, I felt the shift in atmosphere. 7 pairs of eyes locked onto me, their weight almost tangible. Class 1A, the best of Mythos Academy, all present before me. Ren's reaction was the most visible. His violet eyes widened, his fists clenching reflexively as he straightened in his seat. Rachel, on the other hand, looked at me with unabashed joy, her smile bright and warm. Cecilia's reaction was similar, though there was something more in her expression, a curious mix of pride and something else I couldn't quite place. Ian's golden eyes glimmered with interest, his usual composed demeanor breaking slightly as his head tilted ever so slightly. Jean, stoic as always, managed a flicker of surprise in his otherwise unreadable features. And then there was Lucifer. His verdant eyes narrowed, their piercing gaze sweeping over me like a scanner assessing a potential rival. He didn't speak, but the tension in his posture said everything. For the first time, I was on his level, or at least, that's how it seemed in terms of mana rank. White rank. The same rank he'd held as his unshakable badge of superiority. Until now. The silence was palpable, the room charged with an invisible current. It was Rachel who finally broke it. Arthur, she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and disbelief. You reached white rank. Cecilia smirked, though her eyes betrayed her own surprise. Of course he did. It's Arthur. Common sense has no place here. Before anyone else could chime in, the door hissed open. Professor Nero stepped inside, his sharp gaze sweeping over us with the precision of a hawk surveying its territory. As his eyes landed on me, they lingered just a fraction longer than usual, a flicker of surprise crossing his otherwise stoic features. But, true to form, he didn't comment on it. Good to see everyone back, he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the room's tension. I trust your spring breaks were productive. He didn't wait for a response, instead tapping on his holotablet. A 3D display materialized in front of him, showing a detailed schedule that loomed over the room like a harbinger of doom. As you are all aware, we are now in the final stretch of the semester, Nero began. 2 months remain until the end of your festival, which will include the Sovereign's Tournament, a chance for you to prove your worth against the best Mythos has to offer. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath at the mention of the tournament. The Sovereign's Tournament was more than just an event, it was a battlefield, a stage where reputations were forged and legends born. Before that, however, Nero continued, you will have your written exams and must submit your respective end-of-year projects. Both are non-negotiable, so I suggest you manage your time wisely. His gaze swept across the room again, pausing momentarily on each of us as if weighing our potential. This is the final sprint. For those of you who aim to stand at the pinnacle, now is the time to prove it. The charged silence of the room hung heavy even as we were dismissed, like the lingering smell of ozone after a storm. As the others filed out, their murmurs about the upcoming Sovereign's Tournament fading into the corridor, I headed off to my next class, a class that had, over time, become my sanctuary of sorts. Necromancy. Stepping into the lab, I was greeted by the familiar, almost soothing sight of flickering holographic displays, shelves stacked with mana cores and runic texts, and the faint hum of containment fields housing all manner of dark magical artifacts. The room was a masterpiece of blending tradition and technology, a testament to Mythos Academy's prowess. Professor Gravemore was already there, his long fingers trailing over a floating projection of some intricate runic structure. At my entry, his gaze flicked up, and for the briefest moment, his usually stern face betrayed a flicker of surprise. His dark, hawk-like eyes narrowed as they swept over me, clearly assessing the changes in my mana signature. White rank already, he said, the faintest note of surprise in his gravelly voice. Impressive, Arthur. Truly. Though not entirely unexpected, knowing you. Thank you, Professor, I said with a polite bow, suppressing the urge to grin. His sharp eyes shifted past me as Jean walked in, his usual stoic expression intact. Professor Gravemore nodded at him, handing him a holoslate loaded with assignments. You, Jean, will work on these autonomous mana flow equations. They're rudimentary, so I expect nothing less than precision, Gravemore said before turning his full attention back to me. You, however, he continued, his tone weightier now, are here for something far more significant. He gestured toward the corner of the room, where a workstation glowed faintly, its display showing a list of materials alongside intricate runic diagrams. The Lich, he said simply. The word hung in the air like a solemn promise. You want to begin its construction, yes? I nodded, the weight of the task pressing down on me. Yes, Professor. I'm ready. Are you? Gravemore's sharp gaze pierced through me, as though searching for any trace of hesitation. You have the materials, the rank, and the ability. But assembling a lich isn't just a task of skill, it's a crucible. One misstep, and the results could be catastrophic. Are you prepared for that? I swallowed hard but nodded again. I am. He studied me for a long moment before giving a curt nod of approval. Good. Then this weekend, I'll oversee the process personally. But make no mistake, Arthur, I won't be able to help much. The Lich's creation hinges entirely on your Black Star's dark mana. Without it, the assembly simply cannot proceed. Thank you, Professor, I said, bowing deeply. He waved me off, stepping toward the workstation and beckoning me to follow. Come, let us revise everything before the undertaking. If you make even a single mistake, I'll ensure it doesn't cost you more than your pride. But that's as far as I can intervene. The rest is on you. I followed him to the glowing display, where the details of my materials and the lich's design were laid out in meticulous detail. The skeleton of the blood wyvern, the skull of the arch-lich, the basilisk heart as the source, and the Evernight staff, all of it gleamed with latent power, waiting to be unified into a singular, terrifying entity. First, Gravemore began, his voice taking on the cadence of a seasoned lecturer, the skeleton. It has already been mana-programmed to harmonize with the skull and the source. The runes inscribed upon it will act as the foundation of the lich's physical form. However, during the assembly, your dark mana will need to flow through it to activate the programming fully. Any deviation, and the entire structure could destabilize. I nodded, committing his words to memory. Next, the skull, he continued, pointing to the detailed diagram of the arch-lich's skull. The skull represents the mind. It will dictate the lich's intelligence, its capacity to reason and strategize. The programming we've added is robust, but you'll need to bind it to the source using your own mana. This is where the first major challenge lies. The synchronization must be perfect. Your mana will serve as the bridge between the mind and the soul. I leaned in closer, absorbing every word. Gravemore's voice was steady, authoritative, but not without a certain edge of caution. He knew the risks as well as I did. And finally, he said, his tone lowering slightly, the source, the basilisk heart. This is the soul of the lich, its core essence. While the programming has been partially completed to simplify the process, the true work begins when you pour your mana into it. The heart must be awakened, but in a controlled manner. If you lose control. He let the sentence hang, the unspoken consequences heavy in the air. I nodded grimly. I understand. Do you? Gravemore asked, his dark eyes locking onto mine. The basilisk heart is a tier above everything else in this assembly. Even with the limiters in place, its sheer power could overwhelm you. Your black star will be tested like never before. Do you truly understand what that means? I do, I said, my voice firm. And I'm ready. Gravemore's gaze softened, just slightly. Very well. Once the source is bound to the skull and the skeleton, the final step will be activating the staff. The Evernight staff will serve as the lich's anchor, tying together the mind, body, and soul. This will be the easiest step, but only if the previous stages are successful. Do you follow? Yes, Professor, I said, my confidence bolstered by his thorough explanation. Good, he said, his voice losing some of its edge. You've come far, Arthur. Farther than I expected, if I'm honest. But this weekend will be your greatest challenge yet. Do not underestimate it. I won't, I promised. He stepped back, folding his arms as he regarded me with something approaching pride. Then prepare yourself. Review the materials, refine your mana control, and rest while you can. The creation of a lich is no small feat, but if anyone can succeed, it's you. Chapter 148, Lich, 2. The morning felt heavier than usual. Not just because my spatial ring, now laden with every component for the lich ritual, pulled at my consciousness, reminding me of the monumental task ahead. No, the real weight sat coiled in my chest, a knot of tension that refused to unravel. Today, I would attempt something colossal, something that even ascendant rank necromancers would hesitate to try. And as prepared as I was, as meticulously as I'd planned, the enormity of my ambition pressed down on me like an immovable stone. I realized, with a pang of uncertainty, that I needed more than just confidence or resolve before I entered Professor Gravemore's lab. I needed the voices of the people who mattered most, the voices that could steady my feet on this precarious path. My first stop was the Academy Gardens, a sanctuary of winding paths, flowers nurtured under carefully tuned mana lamps, and an air of quiet serenity. Rachel often spent her evenings here alone, reading or daydreaming beneath the sprawling magnolia tree that dominated one corner of the garden. The pale petals drifted lazily on the breeze, creating the impression of snow in mid-spring. I found her seated on a small wooden bench, a worn book in one hand and a delicate cup of tea in the other. The soft rustle of leaves provided a gentle background lullaby. As I approached, she glanced up, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. "Hey, Arthur," she greeted, a warm smile lighting her features. "You look like you've got something serious on your mind." I sat beside her, nerves dancing at the edge of my awareness. "I wanted to talk to you about, today," I began, voice subdued. She set her tea aside, closing her book with a deliberate movement. "Today?" There was a note of concern in her tone, but it was laced with empathy, with that unwavering warmth I'd come to depend on. I fiddled with my sleeve, inhaling slowly. "I'm making the lich, Ratch." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, though no trace of fear emerged. Instead, she simply placed her hand over mine, her eyes steady. "Arthur, you've spent months preparing for this," she said gently. "You're ready. You're more than ready." I swallowed hard, the tension in my chest slightly easing. But what if I'm not? What if something goes wrong? I can't. I don't want to fail. Her grip tightened, and her gaze locked onto mine. "Then you try again," she said, as though it were the simplest truth in the world. "Because that's who you are. You don't stop, you don't give up, and it's one of many reasons you're precious to me." I blinked, a spark of gratitude igniting deep within. Somehow, hearing Rachel articulate that unwavering confidence in me lifted my spirits. "Thanks," I murmured. "It's good to hear you say that." Next on my list was Cecilia. I found her in one of the training halls, the faint hum of manilaced contraptions underscoring her practice sessions. Her crimson hair was tied back, the ends brushing the collar of her academy jacket, and a thin film of sweat glistened on her brow. Each motion she made crackled with a raw edge of power, her practice spells weaving arcs of energy through the air. She caught sight of me lingering by the entrance. Her eyebrows lifted. "You look like you're about to do something incredibly stupid," she remarked dryly, never one to mince words. I exhaled, letting out a half-laugh. "I'm making the lich today." An unspoken tension settled in the hall, and for a moment, she seemed torn between scolding me or shaking her head in exasperation. Then she let out a rough sigh, crossing her arms over her chest. "Of course you are. Because why wouldn't Arthur Nightingale tackle something insane?" she said, voice steeped in a blend of annoyance and grudging respect. I hesitated, remembering how harsh she could be with her truths. I was hoping for some words of encouragement. Something to remind me I'm not walking a total suicide path. Her gaze narrowed, and for a beat, I worried she'd simply scoff. Instead, she let out a sardonic laugh. "Encouragement, huh? Fine. Don't screw up." I groaned. "Come on, Cecilia. You can do better than that." She moved closer, and to my surprise, she placed a hand on my shoulder. "Look, you're a pain most of the time, but you're also the most annoyingly capable person I've met. If anyone can pull off a lich creation at your rank, it's you. Just don't let that ego blow it." Something about her bluntness was oddly comforting. Her version of support might be prickly, but it was genuine. "Thanks," I said, feeling a wry grin tug at my lips. "Anytime," she replied with a roll of her eyes. Then her smirk returned. "But if you do botch it, I'm charging double my usual fee for saving your sorry hide." "Deal," I said, the weight on my shoulders easing a bit more. I found Serafina near the academy grounds, beneath a cherry blossom tree that graced the outer courtyard. The petals drifted in soft pink clusters around her, a delicate contrast to her usual stoic posture. Her silver hair caught the afternoon sun, lending her an ethereal air. She turned her head slightly as I approached, as if sensing my presence before I spoke. "Arthur," she acknowledged, voice tinged with curiosity. "What do you need?" "I'm making the lich today," I said, stepping closer. The swirl of petals brushed across my feet. I guess I just wanted to hear something from you first. For a beat, she remained silent, eyes flicking toward the drifting blooms. You don't need my words. You've already made up your mind, haven't you? The directness of her response gave me pause, but I pressed on. Maybe so. But I'd still like to hear them. It would mean something to me, Serafina. She faced me then, blue eyes cool yet not unkind. You're reckless, stubborn, and too confident for your own good. But you also make the impossible seem possible. It's infuriating. She paused, letting out a soft sigh. That's why you'll succeed. Not because you're flawless, but because you won't accept failure as an option. Her words, quiet as they were, sent warmth through my chest. Serafina. I began, unsure how to respond. A faint twitch of her lips might have been a smile. Don't make me regret believing in you, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, feeling my throat tighten. Thank you, I managed. I won't. Lastly, I found Rose at the Academy Cafe, stirring a cup of coffee with a bored expression. She arched an eyebrow as I settled into the chair opposite her. Arthur, you look like you're on a mission to gather last-minute pep talks. Spill. I couldn't help but chuckle. Rose never missed a beat. I'm making the lich today, I confessed. Just wanted to talk before I go. She set her spoon down, leaning back. You never fail to surprise me. Building a lich? Sure, why not? I'm half convinced you could juggle meltdown bombs and come out unscathed. I grimaced, but there was a fondness beneath her sarcasm. So, that's a "you'll be fine" from you? Obviously, she replied, rolling her eyes. You're insane, but you're also a genius. I'd be more shocked if you didn't succeed. Just do me a favor and remember all the times I helped you when you're some unstoppable necromancer with a pet lich, okay? I snorted. How could I forget? She sipped her coffee, a grin dancing at the edges of her lips. Good. Now quit bothering me and go prove you're as amazing as I know you are. By the time I stepped into Professor Gravemore's lab, an echoing chamber brimming with dusty grimoires, archaic relics, and mana-driven apparatus, the knot in my chest felt lighter. The voices of my friends, mentors, and rivals echoed in my mind, each in their own way telling me the same truth: you can do this. And if I failed, I'd try again. Professor Gravemore stood at one of the tall counters, the faint hum of a complex device overshadowed by the hush in the lab. He glanced at me as I entered, taking in the slight edge of nerves in my posture. You're late, he said, though no real reprimand colored his words. You've memorized the sequence? Gravemore asked, glancing at me over his spectacles. I have, I replied, voice firm. I surveyed the arrangement, verifying the runes. Everything was in place. This was it. And you understand the risk? Gravemore continued, his gaze intense. If your will falters, if your calculations slip, the backlash could be catastrophic. You may lose more than just the lich components, you could lose your life, or worse. A prickle of fear danced along my spine. Yes, I said quietly. But I'm prepared. The professor's eyes narrowed, evaluating me for any trace of doubt. Finding none, he stepped aside. Then proceed. Chapter 149, Lich, 3. I exhaled, letting the tension ebb away for a moment. This was it. Months of preparation, of theory, of gathering impossible materials, all leading to this exact moment. Everything was in place. I had spent countless hours practicing the necessary mana threads, weaving them over and over again to connect the source, skull, and skeleton. I understood the theory, the mana programming, and every microscopic detail of the process like the back of my hand. Now, I had to put it all into action. On the table before me lay the culmination of those efforts, the scarlet blood wyvern skeleton, gleaming faintly under the laboratory lights, its ominous presence filling the room. This was no ordinary skeleton, It had been compressed and meticulously processed to serve as the foundation for my lich's body. Next to it, the skull of an arch-lich, etched with ancient, unreadable runes that seemed to hum with their own energy. A gift from King Alastair Creighton, Rachel's father, it practically radiated raw, terrifying power. And finally, there was the basilisk heart. It pulsed faintly, as though even in death, its essence refused to fully fade. This would form the lich's soul, the nexus of its very being. Everything I needed to create something few had ever dared to even dream of was here. The tools, the materials, the knowledge, and me. Now, I just had to bring it all together. No pressure. I inhaled deeply, activating lucent harmony. A tingling warmth spread through my arms as the glowing sigils of Luna's power emerged, wrapping around me like a second skin. My mana shifted, first turning to silver, bright and pure. Then, with a focused effort, I let it deepen, darken, twisting into the deep, rich black of my black star. My white star remained dormant, silent and still, as it had to be. The two could never work together, an immutable law of mana. Professor Gravemore stood to the side, arms crossed, his sharp eyes scrutinizing every move I made. He didn't say a word, waiting for me to take the first step. I reached for the blood of the mana beast that Vokrit had provided, a viscous, crimson liquid that shimmered faintly with latent power. This blood wasn't just symbolic, it was the conductor for the mana threads that would bind the components together. I dipped my fingers into it and began tracing the summoning circle onto the table. The circle's design had been meticulously crafted by Vokrit's finest necromancers. Complex sigils intertwined with delicate arcs and sharp angles, the geometry precise and unforgiving. Each stroke had to be perfect, each line imbued with just the right amount of mana. There was no room for error. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of my mana and the rhythmic drip of the blood as I worked. The sigils began to glow faintly as I completed each section, the circle coming alive under my hands. "Good," Professor Gravemore murmured, his voice low and steady. "The symmetry is perfect. Keep going." I didn't respond, too focused to speak. My fingers moved almost of their own accord, guided by instinct and precision as I completed the final sigil. The circle flared for a brief moment before settling into a steady, ominous glow. "Perfect," Professor Gravemore said, nodding in approval. "Now, move on to the skeleton." I exhaled, wiping the sweat from my brow. That was the easy part, I told myself. Now came the true challenge. I placed my hand on the blood wyvern skeleton, closing my eyes to better focus. The moment my mana made contact, I felt it, a dense, complex web of programming already inscribed into the bones by Vokrit's necromancers. It was intricate, elegant, and perfectly aligned to serve as the body aspect of the lich. My job was to expand upon it, to add the necessary layers of programming to make it functional, to breathe the first semblance of life into it. The skeleton felt cold under my hand, an almost unnatural chill that seemed to seep into my very core. I concentrated, letting my mana flow along the pre-existing lines of programming, tracing them carefully. It was like walking a tightrope. One misstep, one miscalculation, and the entire structure could collapse. Slowly, Professor Gravemore instructed, his voice steady. "Feel the flow of the programming. Understand it before you modify it." I nodded, though I didn't dare open my eyes. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to add my own lines of mana code. These weren't just random additions, they were carefully planned threads designed to enhance the skeleton's capacity, to allow it to integrate seamlessly with the source and skull later. Each thread had to be anchored perfectly, each connection aligned to the larger framework. It was like adding stitches to an impossibly complex tapestry, one that was already a masterpiece in its own right. Time seemed to blur as I worked. Minutes turned into hours, each moment filled with relentless focus. My mana reserves drained steadily, the strain beginning to weigh on me. My hands trembled slightly, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Finally, I placed the last thread, the mana code flaring briefly as it settled into place. I pulled my hand back, breathing heavily. The skeleton now shimmered faintly, the programming complete, for now. Good work, Professor Gravemore said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. You finished the body aspect. That was the simplest part, but it was still no small feat. Take a break, Arthur. You've earned it. Can I afford to? I asked, my voice tinged with exhaustion. You must, he replied firmly. This process has to be completed within 50 hours, yes, but you'll need your full strength for the source and skull. Your mana reserves are holding up well, but your mind is another matter entirely. I nodded reluctantly, stepping back from the table. He was right. My mind felt like it had run a marathon, the calculations and focus required for the skeleton taking their toll. Nearly a quarter of my reserves had been consumed already. I wouldn't have made it this far without reaching white rank, I thought grimly, the realization striking me. If I had tried this even a few weeks ago, I would have run out of mana long before completing the skeleton. I sank into a nearby chair, closing my eyes as I let my mind rest. The first step was complete, but the hardest work still lay ahead. After a much-needed rest, I returned to work. My next task was the mind aspect, infusing the Arch-Lich's skull. The skull rested on the table, its surface faintly glinting under the lab's soft electric lighting. It was a dull, ivory-white object that radiated an unsettling aura, the kind of object you instinctively avoided looking at for too long. Ancient runes etched into its surface pulsed faintly, remnants of Vokrit's initial programming. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I approached. My black star thrummed within me, an endless reservoir of dark mana waiting to be harnessed. Activating it, I allowed the threads of my dark mana to flow into my hands, tingling as it pooled at my fingertips. I placed my hands firmly on the skull's surface, feeling its inherent resistance, the vestiges of the Arch-Liches will lingering like stubborn shadows. Start slow, Gravemore said, his voice low and reassuring. This is where many necromancers falter. Let your mana settle. Don't overpower it. I nodded and closed my eyes, focusing. The initial resistance was strong, the skull testing me, its programming pushing back as though the Arch-Lich's ego still lurked within. But my mana wasn't just a foreign intruder, it was dominant. Slowly, methodically, I allowed my mana to seep into the existing lines of programming left by Vokrit. Each rune, each line, each curve needed to be overlaid with my own mana, woven together to make the Lich's mind my creation, not a relic of the Arch-Lich's past. The process was like threading a needle while blindfolded. The skull resisted at every step, the programming lines twisting and shifting as if alive. My mind buzzed with the effort, my focus narrowing to the microscopic level as I traced each mana thread. It was maddeningly precise work, and my hands trembled as I pressed on, forcing the skull to accept my influence. Good, Gravemore murmured, his tone encouraging. It's reacting. You're overriding it. Minutes turned into hours. Sweat dripped from my temple, pooling on the table beneath me, but I didn't stop. Each successful thread was a small victory, and with every new line of programming, I could feel the skull bending to my will. When I finished overlaying Vokrit's programming with my own, I moved to the next stage, adding new mana programming. This was where the real challenge began. Unlike the skeleton, where the programming was more structural, the skull's programming was deeply conceptual. It wasn't just about giving it commands, it was about defining its identity. The skull was the mind of the Lich, the core of its intelligence and decision-making. My programming had to be precise enough to create a functional thought process, yet restrictive enough to ensure the Lich didn't gain true sentience. Of course, this would only come together with the source. I worked meticulously, carving out commands and logical pathways with my mana threads. Each thread glowed faintly as it wove into the existing web of programming, creating something new, something uniquely mine. The skull began to hum softly, an eerie resonance that filled the lab. Impressive, Gravemore commented. It's accepting your programming more smoothly than I anticipated. Your control has improved. I allowed myself a small smile at the praise, though I didn't dare lose focus. The work was delicate, and a single mistake could unravel hours of progress. I poured everything into the task, my mind burning with the effort as I completed the final lines. When the last thread snapped into place, the skull went silent. The faint hum ceased, replaced by a stillness that felt almost contemplative. "It's done," I said, my voice hoarse. Gravemore stepped forward, examining the skull with a critical eye. "Remarkable," he muttered. "The flow is seamless. You've handled the mind aspect beautifully." I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to savor the small victory. But the respite was brief. My gaze drifted to the table, to the object resting at its center, the basilisk heart. Chapter 150, Lich, 4. The basilisk heart sat on the table, its crimson surface glimmering faintly under the lab's lights. Golden veins traced intricate paths across it, pulsating in a slow, deliberate rhythm that reminded me of a beast's heartbeat, echoing from some forgotten era. It exuded a power that was both awe-inspiring and menacing, a living, breathing remnant of a mythic creature long since vanished from our mortal plane. I steeled myself, hands poised over the heart. This was the source, the very soul of my would-be lich, and the apex of my research. The skeleton had been a lesson in exhaustion, a puzzle of sinew and bone that tested my patience. The skull was an ordeal of exactness, every rune etched with surgical precision. Yet here, confronting the heart, I sensed something far more alive. Though separated from the basilisk's body, the heart was still defiant, its power roiling beneath the surface like a caged tempest. Professor Gravemore stood a short distance away, leaning on his cane. His gaze was sharp with intellectual curiosity, tempered by caution. "The heart is unlike the others," he said quietly. "The skeleton and skull are passive, waiting to be shaped by your intent. The heart, by its nature, resists. It acts. It will test you, Arthur." I swallowed, my throat suddenly parched. "I'm ready," I said, though my stomach twisted with apprehension. "Good. Remember the standard method," Gravemore continued. 3 bands around the source, each corresponding to the lich's fundamental aspects: body, mind, and soul. These bands form conduits linking the heart to the skeleton and skull. The difficulty lies not just in forming them but ensuring perfect harmony. One misalignment, and the entire structure collapses. I exhaled, drawing on loosened harmony, sensing my mana shift in response. Luna's blessing flickered along my arms in ghostly sigils. With an effort of will, I suppressed my white star and called forth my black star instead, allowing dark mana to flow through my fingertips. Almost instantly, the room dimmed, as though the overhead lights had lost some of their brilliance. Even Professor Gravemore's silhouette seemed to fade into the gloom, a mere watcher on the edges of my conjuration. Placing my hands on the heart, I felt warmth emanating from that smooth, unsettling surface. The moment my mana made contact, the heart pushed back. It was a fierce rejection, as if it knew I intended to subdue it. "Steady," Gravemore said. "It's testing your resolve. Show no weakness." I clenched my jaw, forcing my mana forward one careful strand at a time. Thread after thread extended from my fingers, forming the first circular band around the heart's surface. The glow was faint, like embers in a deep cave, but it pulsed with gathering intensity. The heart thrashed against my efforts, and I had to fight to keep each woven strand intact. The first band, the body, served to anchor the heart to the skeleton. It was straightforward in theory but demanded painstaking focus. Each we've had to align with the basilisk's inherent power, or risk snapping apart at a single misstep. My breath came in shallow pants by the time the band solidified around the heart. Professor Gravemore nodded approvingly. "Good. Now the second band, mind." If the body band was demanding, the mind band was labyrinthine. The connection to the skull required bridging the lich's consciousness, a delicate thread that would allow it to think, reason, and obey. My arms trembled from the constant push and pull of the heart's living energy. Each mana line had to be scripted with a subtle pattern of commands, lest the lich's mind run rampant or spiral into madness. Time crawled, marked only by the rise and fall of my ragged breathing. After what felt like an eternity, the second band was done, glowing slightly brighter than the first. My forehead dripped with sweat, and my mana reserves felt dangerously low, but the heart was now ringed by two distinct circles, each pulsing in tandem. Gravemore's voice, usually so firm, sounded almost gentle. "The final band is the soul," he said. "Most fail here, Arthur. The lich's essence must be perfectly aligned, or it all unravels." I drew a deep breath and began shaping the third band. This was the core of the lich, where body and mind converged into a singular will. The basilisk's heart flared with renewed vigor, as though some deep instinct warned it of my intentions. My vision blurred, edges darkening. The walls of the lab vanished behind the searing intensity of the heart's glow. "Don't lose focus, Arthur," Gravemore intoned, but his voice sounded distant. The soul band took shape under my trembling hands. My mana wove a net around the heart, forging a link that would bind the lich together. And then, halfway through the process, everything changed. A ripple of power, faint at first, coursed through the heart. It crested into a surge so forceful it slammed into my consciousness. My surroundings disintegrated, replaced by a boundless void. The basilisk heart loomed there, impossibly large and pulsing with golden veins like rivers of molten fire. A voice, deep and resonant, called my name. Arthur Nightingale. It resonated through every cell of my body, hypnotic in its allure. I was transfixed. "You have come far," the voice said. "Few command such resolve. Even fewer such ambition." I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. "Who are you?" I managed, voice cracking with strain. "I am the will of the basilisk," the voice whispered. "A fragment of the being you now harness. And I can grant you what you desire." The void shifted, revealing a grand vista, a mountaintop under a golden sky, armies kneeling in silent devotion. Beside me stood the lich, impossibly majestic, radiating power that dwarfed anything I'd seen. My heart pounded. It was everything I'd ever dreamed: authority, renown, and an escape from every mortal limit that caged me. "Embrace me," the basilisk's will said, a seductive current woven through its tone. "Accept my power, and together we will conquer. Your name shall endure for all time." My hand, seemingly of its own accord, stretched out to touch the heart. The vision vibrated with an intoxicating promise. But just as my fingers made contact, the dream shattered. I found myself back in the lab, drenched in sweat, the basilisk heart beneath my hands. I gasped heavily as I touched my beating heart, chest rising and falling in frantic rhythm. I understood it now. Underscore 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 underscore. Professor Gravemore watched Arthur sway on his feet, eyes glassy from whatever unseen struggle he had just endured. Gravemore had never seen him so pale. The gloom of the lab pressed close, the only light coming from the basilisk heart's bands, now half-forged and flickering. "Arthur?" Gravemore said carefully, taking a step forward. "Are you all right?" Arthur did not respond at first. His hands remained planted on the basilisk heart, dark mana sparking fitfully around his fingertips. The final band, the soul, was unfinished, the weave incomplete. Had he run out of mana? Or had the basilisk's will bested him? Just then, Arthur's head snapped up. His eyes were wide, but there was a strange clarity in them. Gravemore braced himself for a collapse. Instead, Arthur drew a shuddering breath and exhaled slowly, as though centering himself. Something had changed in the boy's posture. "Stay back, Professor," Arthur said, his voice subdued but not weak. "I'm about to try something." Different. Gravemore felt a spike of unease. Arthur, we must adhere to the known principles. The soul band must follow the sanctioned method. If you deviate. I know, Arthur replied, voice low. But the basilisk heart is more than a mere power source. I can feel it resisting in ways the standard texts never accounted for. His gaze flicked to Gravemore, then back to the heart. Trust me, Professor, or stop me now. Gravemore's grip on his cane tightened. Everything in him screamed that meddling with the established process was a fool's errand. He had witnessed countless students, each convinced they had a new angle, only to watch them fail catastrophically. Yet Arthur's determination was unsettlingly convincing. The tension in the air crackled, as though fate itself were holding its breath. Arthur, I warn you, Gravemore began, but it was too late. In a single fluid motion, Arthur rearranged his mana threads, severing several lines of the incomplete soul band. Gravemore almost lunged forward in protest. Changing the structure so abruptly? That was unthinkable. But the basilisk heart shuddered, flaring bright in alarm, as though it recognized the shift. Arthur! Gravemore shouted, his voice echoing in the small lab. You'll destroy yourself and everything we've worked for. But Arthur pressed on. With a steadiness that made Gravemore's heart pound, he channeled mana directly through the heart's golden veins, weaving new connections into the existing body and mind bands. The complexity of it staggered Gravemore. Each thread was braided with a dark mana current that pulsed in time with the heart itself. It was as if Arthur were coaxing the basilisk's will rather than overpowering it, an approach entirely off-book, verging on heresy by every standard Gravemore knew. Desperate, Gravemore tried to intervene. He prepared a counter-seal, intending to shut down the reaction before it escalated. But the moment he raised his cane, an invisible force slammed him backward. Sparks danced across his vision as he hit the lab wall. Arthur's control over the basilisk heart had grown so entwined that it defended him, consciously or not. Groaning, Gravemore staggered upright, heart thrashing in his chest. He peered through the haze of swirling mana and saw Arthur enveloped in a storm of shadowy light. The basilisk heart glowed with an intensity that bordered on blinding. The final soul band was forming, but its structure was nothing like Gravemore had studied or taught. Then it happened, a sudden stillness, as if the world itself paused. Arthur stood over the basilisk heart, the newly forged triple bands, body, mind, and soul, vibrating with raw energy. In a single, decisive motion, Arthur completed the last thread. The resulting shockwave knocked Gravemore off his feet despite his strength. Shelves rattled, glass beakers shattered, and dust rained down from the ceiling. The basilisk heart blazed with an unearthly light, then went dark. In the silence that followed, only Arthur remained standing. His breaths were ragged, and dark mana still crackled faintly around his hands. Gravemore stared, incapable of speech. He had expected failure, an explosion, anything but this. Yet the lich drew breath, or some facsimile of it, its empty eye sockets shining with faint red embers. With a single, shaky movement, it flexed its clawed fingers. A test, as if verifying its own existence. As if in a dream, Gravemore stumbled forward. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes. He sank to his knees, cane clattering beside him. He scaled the wall of talent. Gravemore whispered, voice quivering with equal parts reverence and disbelief. Chapter 151, Lich, 5. Magnus Gravemore was born in the Western Continent, a place known throughout the world for its unrelenting fog and necromantic heritage. There, on a bleak stretch of moorland, every town bore a graveyard larger than its marketplace, and the children played with harmless specters the way youngsters elsewhere might chase fireflies. Almost every soul in those parts possessed some degree of dark mana from birth, as natural to them as breathing. Young Magnus was no exception. He displayed his affinity early, reviving small creatures by accident when his emotions ran high, sending the neighbors muttering about how he would grow up to be either a fearsome mage or a notable cautionary tale. In time, he found his path. Necromancy was both an art and a craft in the Western Continent, and each generation produced a handful of truly gifted individuals, those who rose beyond simply animating skeletons or binding disembodied spirits. Magnus Gravemore, thin and pale with a shock of black hair, threw himself into his studies like a man possessed. The deeper the knowledge grew, the more determined he became to master it. He learned under no fewer than 7 renowned necromancy tutors, each passing on arcane secrets gleaned from centuries of trial and error. By the age of 30, he had developed a reputation for meticulous craftsmanship, whether it be inscribing runes on a cadaver's spine or forging complex magical links between a spirit and its chosen vessel. Eventually, Gravemore reached ascendant rank. He did what few necromancers dared to do at his age. He created a lich of his own, knitting together skeletal remains, forging the runic architecture of command, and implanting a bound spirit to animate the husk. In the Western continent, accomplishing this feat before one's hair turned white was a mark of distinct prestige. His lich, stoic and obedient, was evidence of his skill. People whispered his name with equal parts admiration and wariness. For a time, he basked in that subtle glow of recognition. Yet, despite his successes, Gravemore was always keenly aware that there existed a higher peak on the necromantic mountain, the creation of an ancient undead. This was no mere reanimated skeleton or typical lich but a fully autonomous, sentient being, blessed or cursed with its own consciousness, yet still leashed to the will of its creator. It was the crown jewel of the necromantic arts, the wall that separated the highest echelons of necromancers from those who could only approximate true mastery. Many tried and failed, a few ended in horrors too dark to name. Gravemore, for all his talent, repeatedly found himself halted at the threshold. He could raise formidable constructs, even monstrosities that terrified entire towns, but not the ancient undead. He sensed the barrier, invisible yet impenetrable, the so-called wall of talent. For years, he examined why he couldn't push past that boundary. At first, he blamed insufficient knowledge, so he spent countless nights poring over forbidden scrolls in crypt libraries deep beneath the oldest cathedrals of the Western continent. When theory failed, he turned to practice, endlessly experimenting with new runic combinations, exotic creatures' bones, and bizarre incantations gleaned from half-rotten tomes. Still, each attempt ended in partial success or total collapse. The ancient undead remained elusive, always just out of his reach, like an echo he could hear but never trace to its source. Though he despised giving up, Gravemore had to concede, eventually, that there were no more local resources he could exploit. Rumor said that Mythos Academy, the best academy in the world, offered teaching positions to accomplished mages who sought to broaden their horizons. More importantly, it boasted a library containing volumes from every corner of the world. Intrigued by the possibility of deeper knowledge and new perspectives, Gravemore made the journey across the sea. Arriving at Mythos Academy, Gravemore discovered a place alive with young talent, students brandishing spells of every element, from brilliant flames to illusions that twisted reality. He was welcomed as Professor Gravemore, an expert of the dark arts, who would teach necromancy to those brave or foolhardy enough to dabble in it. Still, the wall of talent nagged at him. He instructed his students on the fundamentals, raising lesser undead, binding ghosts, forging minor constructs. He cautioned them against hubris, reminding them how easily necromancy could turn on its master. But privately, he continued his research, determined to find the key that would let him mold an ancient undead. From the dozens of students who passed under his tutelage, only a few showed genuine promise. Among them was Jean Ashbluff, the young prince from the Western continent. Jin's father was the reigning king and Radiant Ranker, also considered the most talented necromancer in the history of the Western continent. The boy possessed an effortless knack for weaving spells that other students struggled with for months. Gravemore was impressed, even proud in a distant sense, but also felt the sharp sting of envy. Would the student surpass the teacher before Gravemore even figured out what he himself was missing? He wrestled with these concerns for some time, hiding them behind a stony demeanor. His lessons remained thorough, even stern, as though he believed that harsh discipline and thorough practice might spur someone, perhaps even himself, to achieve the impossible. Then, one day, Arthur joined Professor Magnus Gravemore's necromancy class. It was late into the semester, a time when most students had already established themselves. The course was intended to refine, not introduce, and Gravemore raised a brow when the headmaster approved a new entrant so far along. It wasn't just any student either. Arthur Nightingale arrived with the odd distinction of possessing both light and dark mana affinities, a rarity in the necromantic arts. Gravemore had seen many prodigies pass through his classroom, students brimming with talent for the forbidden and complex art of necromancy. Yet Arthur struck him differently. He lacked the raw, innate aura of dominance that his other student, Jean Ashbluff, exuded. At first glance, Arthur seemed a contradiction. Light and dark mana, yes, but neither seemed to synergize naturally. Gravemore thought Arthur's dark mana affinity came from his gift rather than his natural core, and as such, it would always be second-rate compared to someone born with it. Still, the boy was diligent, attentive during lectures, always asking questions that demonstrated a hunger for understanding. Focus on one or two summons, Nightingale, Gravemore advised him after their first few lessons. Your talent lies in versatility, but necromancy requires mastery, not breadth. It's better to specialize in simpler creations than spread yourself too thin. Arthur simply nodded at the time, his expression unreadable. Gravemore assumed that the boy would heed his advice, perhaps attempt a skeletal mage by the end of the year. Most students with his profile didn't aim high in necromancy. It wasn't their primary discipline. But then Arthur approached him a few weeks later, his voice calm but firm. I want to make a lich for my end-of-year project. Gravemore nearly dropped his pen. He had to take a moment to ensure he'd heard correctly. A lich, he repeated, his tone incredulous. You want to create a lich? Yes, Professor, Arthur replied. Nightingale, I hope you know what you are asking. Gravemore pinched the bridge of his nose. A lich isn't just another necromantic construct. It is the pinnacle of dark summoning, requiring a mastery you lack. I understand, Arthur said, unflinching. But I still want to try. And I'll do it. Gravemore stared at him, half expecting a smirk or some sign of arrogance, but Arthur's expression remained steady. The boy wasn't boasting, he genuinely believed he could do it. Against his better judgment, Gravemore found himself nodding. Very well. I'll guide you. But understand this, Arthur, this is not a task for ambition alone. It requires precision, talent, and luck in equal measure. If you misstep even once, it will collapse. Internally, Gravemore didn't believe the boy would succeed. A lich required perfection in theory, programming, and execution. Arthur wasn't even an integration rank necromancer, he was a silver ranker with limited experience. Still, the boy's determination intrigued him. He decided to humor the attempt, if only to teach Arthur a valuable lesson about overreaching one's limits. But then the unexpected began to happen. Arthur worked tirelessly, pouring himself into the study of lich theory. Gravemore watched as he mastered the foundational mana programming lines that most students struggled with. The boy's focus was singular, his progress rapid. Then, as if to silence every doubter, Arthur formed a black star, a feat that even seasoned necromancers couldn't achieve without years of practice. Gravemore was stunned. He couldn't recall another instance of a non-dedicated necromancer accomplishing such a thing. Arthur didn't stop there. He began gathering materials, impossibly high-quality ones. A blood wyvern skeleton, an arch-lich skull, a basilisk heart. Each acquisition defied expectation, both in quality and Arthur's sheer audacity. Slowly but surely, Gravemore's doubts began to waver. By the time Arthur announced that he was ready to assemble the lich, Gravemore realized he had underestimated him. The day came, and Gravemore guided him to his personal lab, granting Arthur the privilege of assembling a lich, a historical feat, even for an experienced necromancer. As Arthur began, Gravemore watched closely, expecting to intervene at the first sign of error. But Arthur moved with precision, weaving the mana threads to harmonize the body, soul, and mind aspects. Then something unexpected happened. Stay back, Professor, Arthur said, his voice subdued but not weak. I'm about to try something different. Gravemore felt a spike of unease. Arthur, we must adhere to the known principles. The soul band must follow the sanctioned method. if you deviate. I know, Arthur replied, voice low. But the basilisk heart is more than a mere power source. I can feel it resisting in ways the standard texts never accounted for. His gaze flicked to Gravemore, then back to the heart. Trust me, Professor, or stop me now. Gravemore's grip on his cane tightened. Everything in him screamed that meddling with the established process was a fool's errand. He had witnessed countless students, each convinced they had a new angle, only to watch them fail catastrophically. Yet Arthur's determination was unsettlingly convincing. The tension in the air crackled, as though fate itself were holding its breath. Arthur, I warn you, Gravemore began, but it was too late. In a single fluid motion, Arthur rearranged his mana threads, severing several lines of the incomplete soul band. Gravemore almost lunged forward in protest. Changing the structure so abruptly? That was unthinkable. But the basilisk heart shuddered, flaring bright in alarm, as though it recognized the shift. Arthur! Gravemore shouted, his voice echoing in the small lab. You'll destroy yourself and everything we've worked for. But Arthur pressed on. With a steadiness that made Gravemore's heart pound, he channeled mana directly through the heart's golden veins, weaving new connections into the existing body and mind bands. The complexity of it staggered Gravemore. Each thread was braided with a dark mana current that pulsed in time with the heart itself. It was as if Arthur were coaxing the basilisk's will rather than overpowering it, an approach entirely off-book, verging on heresy by every standard Gravemore knew. A surge of energy erupted from the basilisk heart, the glow intensifying as if it were alive. Gravemore felt the air shift, a heavy pressure settling over the room. He stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Arthur raised a hand, his expression calm. I've got this, Arthur said, his voice steady. Gravemore froze, torn between his instincts and the boy's unshakable confidence. Arthur continued weaving the mana threads, his movements precise yet unorthodox. Gravemore could only watch as the impossible unfolded before his eyes. When the final threads were in place, the room fell silent. The Lich, incomplete but undeniably alive, stood before them. Gravemore stared, his hands trembling. For the first time in his career, he felt something he thought he'd never experience. Awe. Chapter 152, Lich, 6. I exhaled slowly, staring at the figure standing before me. The Lich was a patchwork of contrast, a creature both majestic and grotesque. Its scarlet blood wyvern skeleton shimmered faintly in the light of the lab's mana orbs, the pure white skull almost glowing in eerie juxtaposition. Nestled within its chest, the basilisk heart pulsed like a living thing, its green-black hue swirling in perpetual motion, a storm trapped within flesh. It was an unsettling masterpiece. Finally, I handed it the Evernight staff, carefully placing the ancient artifact in its bony grip. The Lich grasped the staff with an almost reverent precision. The limiter I had received, an ancient great artifact itself, shimmered faintly as it attached to the Lich's core. The oppressive pressure of its 8-star potential lessened, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My shoulders eased. The Lich now stood before me, tamed, or at least controlled enough for me to wield its power without obliterating myself in the process. Then it moved. Not an aimless twitch or a mechanical adjustment, but a deliberate, conscious motion. Its lower jaw dropped slightly, the faint click of bone echoing in the quiet lab. Are you my creator? It asked, its voice rasping, not with malice, but with a weight that seemed to pierce the room. I froze. My breath hitched. What? Gravemore nearly stumbled into the table, his hand clutching its edge. His usually measured voice was uncharacteristically sharp, almost panicked. Arthur, do you understand what you've done? That's not just a Lich. What do you mean? I asked, the words leaving me like a gasp. You. He hesitated, swallowing visibly. You've created an ancient undead. The term hit me like a hammer. Ancient undead. The crown jewel of necromancy. They weren't just powerful. They weren't just tools. They were alive, or as alive as anything conjured by the art of death could be. Sentient, autonomous, intelligent. Servants with real souls, not bound by mere programming or artificial constructs. They were the unattainable pinnacle, spoken of in reverent whispers and dismissed as myths by most necromancers. That's not possible, I said, my voice trembling. It shouldn't be possible. It shouldn't, Gravemore agreed, his wide eyes fixed on the lich. No one has done this. Not without a gift for dark mana. But this is real. My mind reeled. 1,000 theories collided in my brain, none of them making sense. How did this happen? Gravemore shook his head slowly. I don't know. The soul, it's not just mana threads. It's transformed. You haven't just created a vessel, Arthur. That thing has identity. A will. Arthur, Luna's voice echoed in my mind, unusually subdued. It's the basilisk's soul. Or at least, it started as that. But, something changed. It's beyond even my understanding. I didn't see this coming. I blinked, trying to process her words. The basilisk's soul? Transformed? My brain was starting to feel like a broken mana circuit, sparking with too many inputs and no clear direction. The lich tilted its head, observing me with empty sockets that somehow felt piercing. You are quite young, it said, its tone heavy with something like amusement. And weak. I, too, am weak. Its words snapped me back into focus. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand straighter. I am your creator, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. What is your name? I have none, it replied, the statement as blunt as a hammer. You will give it to me. Names had power. That was the first lesson I'd ever learned in necromancy. To name something was to define it, to claim it. I stared at the lich, its towering frame both awe-inspiring and unnerving. This was no ordinary creation. It was something far greater, something I still didn't fully understand. Erebus, I said finally. The name slipped out almost instinctively, a name from myths long buried in ancient texts. Erebus, the primordial darkness that existed before creation itself. It felt fitting. The lich straightened slightly, as though accepting the name as part of its identity. Erebus, it repeated, the rasp of its voice sending a shiver down my spine. I am Erebus. Gravemore exhaled audibly, breaking the tension. You've done it, Arthur, he said, his tone still tinged with disbelief. You've created something unprecedented. I glanced at him, my mind still struggling to catch up. I didn't mean to create an ancient undead. He gave me a wry smile, the edges of his lips twitching with nervous energy. And yet, here it stands. Erebus lowered its head slightly, a gesture that could have been respect, or something else entirely. You have given me form, purpose, and name. I will serve you, Creator. But I will also grow. As you grow. I stared at it, my heart pounding. This was more than I had bargained for. Far more. Show me what you can do, Erebus, I said. Underscore 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 underscore. Rachel paced the Ophelia dorm lounge like a restless animal, her footsteps soft against the polished floor but betraying her inner turmoil. She wasn't just nervous. Nervous was too polite a word. She was bordering on frantic, her hands wringing together in a way that would have made her younger self cringe with embarrassment. Arthur had been out of contact since Friday. The entirety of the weekend had passed, and not a single word from him. Nothing. Radio silence. And that silence was driving her mad. Would you sit down? Cecilia finally snapped, her tone carrying the precise level of irritation that came from someone who was equally worried but far too proud to admit it. Rachel shot her a glare but obeyed, plopping down on the couch opposite her. How can you be so calm about this? She retorted. He could be hurt. Or worse. Cecilia, lounging with the practiced ease of someone who considered elegance second nature, gave a dismissive wave. Arthur? Hurt? Please. That idiot is like a cockroach. He's not going anywhere. Serafina, who sat at the far end of the room, her posture as straight as a blade, finally spoke, her tone clipped but edged with something that sounded almost like concern. Cecilia is correct. Arthur is resilient. However. She paused, her gaze flickering to Rachel. It is unusual for him to not check in. Rachel leaned forward, her fingers gripping the edge of the coffee table. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. What if he overdid it? You know how he is. Cecilia sighed dramatically, her crimson eyes rolling. Oh, please. If he overdid it, it's because he's a reckless idiot, not because he's incapable. And if he's injured, he'll just bounce back. He always does. Cecilia, if you're not worried, then why are you here? Rachel shot back, her temper fraying at the edges. Cecilia's lips twitched into a smirk, though it didn't reach her eyes. Because, dear Rachel, I find your little panic attack entertaining. Rachel opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, the door to the lounge creaked open. All three heads turned in unison, the tension in the room coiling tight like a spring. Arthur stepped inside, looking utterly exhausted but very much alive. His jacket hung loose over his frame, and there was a faint smear of something dark on his cheek. His hair was a mess, and his usually sharp eyes were lined with fatigue. Arthur. Rachel bolted to her feet, relief flooding her voice. Cecilia stood as well, though with considerably more restraint, while Serafina simply rose, her expression unreadable. You look like you've been through a war, Cecilia commented dryly, though there was a faint softness in her tone that betrayed her relief. Arthur chuckled weakly, running a hand through his hair. I feel like it too. Rachel crossed the room in a heartbeat, stopping just short of grabbing him by the shoulders. Are you okay? What happened? Did it work? Arthur raised a hand, a gesture of placation. I'm fine. Really? And yes, it worked. There was a collective exhale of relief, though it manifested differently in each of them. Rachel's shoulders sagged, Cecilia leaned back slightly, and Serafina's posture relaxed just a fraction. Then show us, Rachel said, her voice firm but laced with curiosity. Show us the lich. Arthur shook his head immediately. Nope. What do you mean, nope? Cecilia demanded, crossing her arms. I mean I'm not showing it to you. Not yet. Arthur smiled faintly, though there was a glint of mischief in his tired eyes. You'll see it when the time comes. Rachel frowned. When the time comes? What does that mean? It means I'll show it to you when I use it against Lucifer in the tournament, Arthur said simply. Until then, you'll have to wait. Consider it something to look forward to. Cecilia huffed, clearly unimpressed. You're such a tease. Arthur's smile widened just a bit. Maybe. Serafina, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. As long as you're unharmed, that is enough for now. Arthur nodded, his expression softening. I promise, I'm okay. Just, really tired. Then go rest, Rachel said, her tone leaving no room for argument. You look like you're about to collapse. Arthur didn't protest. Instead, he gave them a small, grateful smile before heading toward the dormitory halls. As he disappeared down the corridor, the three girls exchanged glances. Well, Cecilia said, breaking the silence, "He's as infuriating as ever." Rachel smirked faintly. "But he's okay." Serafina said nothing, her gaze lingering on the door Arthur had walked through. Finally, she turned and left the lounge, her footsteps quiet but deliberate. Cecilia stretched, her smirk returning. "This tournament's going to be something, isn't it?" Rachel nodded, her heart finally settling back to a steady rhythm. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It really is." Chapter 153, Prelude to Tower of Magic Conference, 1. As the end-of-year festival loomed closer, the atmosphere in Mythos Academy shifted. The air buzzed with anticipation, students scurrying about like particularly stressed-out ants preparing for winter. The curriculum lightened considerably, leaving us time to focus on three major things: the upcoming festival, the written exams, and our end-of-year projects. For me, the latter was a matter already resolved. The Lich. The culmination of months of effort, planning, and a few near-death experiences, both figuratively and otherwise. It was done, complete, and, if I dared say, a masterpiece. There wasn't much left but to hand it in, so I decided to get it out of the way. Professor Gravemore's office was tucked into a quiet corner of the necromancy wing. Gravemore himself was hunched over his desk, pen in hand, writing notes on what appeared to be a disturbingly animated diagram of a corpse. "Arthur," he greeted me without looking up, his deep voice carrying the sort of warmth one might reserve for an exceptionally promising science experiment. "You're here to submit, I assume?" "Yes, Professor," I said, stepping forward and holding out the neatly bound file. It contained every detail about the Lich's creation process. Well, almost every detail. Some secrets, especially the ones tied to the basilisk heart, were better kept buried. Gravemore finally looked up, his dark eyes twinkling with something between pride and incredulity. "All right then," he said with a chuckle, flipping through the file. A+. Done. I blinked. "You're not even going to check it?" Gravemore leaned back in his chair, waving a hand dismissively. "Arthur, please." "Check what?" "That Lich of yours could qualify as a final project for a sixth-year student. A+ is a foregone conclusion." I didn't know whether to feel flattered or slightly concerned. I chose the former. "Thank you, Professor." "Don't thank me," he said, waving it off. "Thank yourself. And that unnatural knack you have for turning necromancy into an art form." He closed the file with a decisive snap and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. His gaze sharpened, and I felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. "But," he said, "there's something else I wanted to discuss with you." I straightened up instinctively. "What is it, Professor?" "The Tower of Magic Conference," he said, his voice carrying the weight of importance. "Have you heard of it?" I frowned, the name ringing a faint bell. "I think so. Isn't that the event where research papers are presented?" "Exactly," Gravemore said, his expression lighting up. "It's the largest academic symposium in the magical world. Students from every major institution are selected to submit papers. Research, innovation, groundbreaking theories, it all happens there." I tilted my head, curiosity piqued. "Why are you bringing this up?" "Because," Gravemore said, his tone turning conspiratorial, "I want you to participate. Specifically, I want you to submit a paper on your Lich creation process." I stared at him. "You mean, reveal my methods?" "Not all of them," he said quickly, leaning back again. "Obviously, there are parts of your work that are unreplicable, like the basilisk heart. But some elements, Arthur. Some elements are pure brilliance. The way you harmonize the soul aspect with the body and mind. The subtle alterations you made to the mana programming. Those are innovations worth sharing." I hesitated. The thought of putting my research out there, exposing it to the scrutiny of experts, was both thrilling and daunting. "What's the benefit?" Gravemore grinned. "Money, for one. You'd receive a stipend if your paper is accepted, and if it's particularly well received, grants could follow. Then there's recognition, your name would be known in every major magical institution. And lastly, it's a challenge. A chance to refine your work, to present it to the world and say, look what I've done. I rubbed the back of my neck. I'd have to be careful about what I reveal. Of course, Gravemore said, nodding. We'll review the paper together before you submit it. But Arthur, you've achieved something extraordinary. It's worth sharing, at least in part. I exhaled, the weight of the decision settling on my shoulders. All right, I said finally. I'll do it. Gravemore's grin widened. Excellent. I knew you'd say yes. Now, get to work. Write that paper and bring it to me for review before the deadline. Yes, Professor, I said, already planning how to approach the task. As I turned to leave, Gravemore's voice stopped me. Oh, and Arthur? Yes? Don't hold back, he said, his tone serious. The world doesn't need another half measure. Show them what you're capable of. I nodded, a slow grin spreading across my face. I will. The Tower of Magic, an institution nearly synonymous with excellence, sat comfortably in its position as number 2 in the world when it came to overall spellcasting and magical innovation, second only to the Creighton family. When it came to necromancy, they occupied a similar position of near supremacy, shadowed only by the Ebony Tower of the Western Continent. The Tower of Magic Conference wasn't just an annual event, it was the event. Held every year in Avalon, the heart of the Slate Mark Empire, it was where the most brilliant magical minds gathered to showcase their latest discoveries, theories, and groundbreaking innovations. For younger, less seasoned participants, the junior section offered an invaluable opportunity, a chance to present research, compete for grants, and gain a foothold in the wider world of magical academia. For someone like me, it was the perfect stage. So, Cecilia began, her lips curling into an all-too-familiar mischievous smile. You're going to present at the Tower of Magic? I glanced up from the notebook where I was jotting down preliminary ideas for my research paper. She was leaning against the doorframe of the lounge, her crimson eyes alight with curiosity and something else, a spark of amusement, perhaps? Yeah, I said with a nod, though I still need to prepare a paper. Professor Gravemore has to approve it first before I can proceed. Interesting, Cecilia mused, her head tilting ever so slightly, that glint in her eyes growing brighter. I look forward to it. There was a certain inflection in her voice that put me on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was planning something, though what, I couldn't say. Cecilia Slatemark had a way of operating on her own wavelength, and I wasn't sure I wanted to tune in. I let it slide for now and focused on my work. The truth was, the money wasn't a driving factor for me. I had plenty of that already, courtesy of my carefully orchestrated deals and investments. What mattered more was the opportunity, the chance to get noticed by the Tower of Magic itself. If I managed to defeat Lucifer in the Sovereign's tournament, the ripples would spread far and wide. Speculation would bloom among the superpowers of the world, particularly those aware of the prophecy. They'd question whether I, not Lucifer, was the second hero foretold. It was a prospect that both excited and unnerved me. Victory would bring recognition, yes, but it would also paint a target on my back, one that the 5 cults would be all too eager to aim at. The Tower of Magic was no simple ally to court, but even a tenuous connection to them could prove invaluable. For now, it would be a seed planted, one that might grow into something greater in the future. And, if I were being honest, the whole thing just seemed fun. Research, writing a paper, presenting it, it scratched a part of my brain that enjoyed solving puzzles and unraveling mysteries. Yet even as I delved into the details of my Lich's creation, a nagging thought pulled at me. There was something missing. I had the materials, the method, and the results, but the process itself was hazy. There was a moment, a pivotal moment, when everything had shifted. I knew I'd been enticed by the basilisk heart's consciousness, lured into a dreamscape of absolute power. But after that? Nothing. A blank space in my memory, like a page torn from a book. Even Luna, with all her insight, had no answers. The frustration simmered as I worked late into the night. Finally, unable to resist the urge any longer, I decided to go straight to the source. Returning to my room, I summoned Erebus. The air in front of me tore like fragile fabric, a small rift opening into a dark void. Erebus emerged from it, his skeletal frame both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Even in his suppressed state, the sheer weight of his presence, a manifestation of death itself, pressed against me, a reminder of the raw power he held. He knelt before me, his hollow eyes glowing faintly. "You summoned me, Master?" His voice was a low, resonant hum, like a distant echo in a cavern. I steadied myself, the sensation of his presence still something I was getting used to. "Erebus, I have a question. When I was assembling you, when I was enticed by the basilisk heart, do you remember what happened?" For a moment, Erebus was silent. Then, he spoke, his words slow and deliberate. "My memory of that time is blank." I frowned, my frustration mounting. "Blank? You don't remember anything at all?" "Nothing clear," Erebus admitted. "But there is one thing." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What is it?" Erebus lifted his head, his glowing eyes narrowing. "All I remember is seeing a skull split in two." The words landed like a hammer blow, sending a shiver down my spine. A skull split in two. The image was vivid, visceral, and it left me with more questions than answers. Luna's voice echoed in my mind, uncharacteristically quiet. "A skull split in two. What does it mean, Arthur?" "I don't know," I murmured, my thoughts racing. The memory, or whatever fragment of it Erebus retained, felt significant, but its meaning eluded me. Chapter 154, Prelude to Tower of Magic Conference, 2. I found myself in Professor Gravemore's dimly lit lab 2 weeks later, holding the final draft of my research paper like it was a time bomb. However, I wasn't alone. To my left, Cecilia Slatemark lounged in her chair with the confidence of someone who had already won, her crimson eyes glinting with amusement. On my right, Rose Springshaper sat with perfect posture, her calm demeanor betraying nothing but quiet determination. Both of them, to my surprise, were also submitting research papers for the Tower of Magic. "Why are you here, of all places?" I whispered to Cecilia, keeping one eye on Professor Gravemore, who was engrossed in a pile of documents on his desk. She smirked, tilting her head in that infuriating way she did whenever she knew something I didn't. "Because it's fun. And I get to visit the Tower of Magic again." That smirk told me there was more to her reasoning, but I decided against prying. Cecilia was like a locked safe, pressing too hard only made it more impossible to crack. Rose, ever the diplomat, simply gave me a small, encouraging smile. "It's a good opportunity," she said softly, as though that explained everything. Professor Gravemore finally stirred from his stack of papers, his dark mana-infused eyes scanning the room like a hawk surveying its prey. He reached out and took Cecilia's paper first, flipping through it with the sort of care one might show to a particularly delicate explosive. For a moment, the lab was silent save for the rustle of pages. Cecilia, of course, looked entirely at ease, leaning back in her chair as though she were in her family's palace rather than a necromancy professor's lab. Meanwhile, I tried not to let my nerves show. Gravemore finished reading and placed the paper down, his brow furrowing slightly. "Most of this paper is going over my head," he admitted, rubbing his temples. I blinked in shock. Professor Gravemore was a man who could casually discuss the intricacies of merging multiple mana streams for complex undead programming. If Cecilia's paper was too advanced for him. "But," he continued, "those researchers at the Tower of Magic will eat this up." "Well done." "Accepted." Cecilia didn't even react, as though Gravemore's words were merely confirming something she already knew. "Thank you, Professor," she said with a smile that was as graceful as it was smug. Next, Gravemore took Rose's paper. She sat up straighter, her focus sharpening as his eyes darted over her work. He muttered to himself occasionally, tapping a finger on the desk. After several minutes, he nodded. This is good, he said, glancing at her, but it could be better. Here, he slid the paper back to her and began pointing out areas where she could make improvements, from clarifying certain diagrams to tightening her explanations of mana density fluctuations. Rose nodded, absorbing his critique without a hint of defensiveness. Thank you, Professor, she said, her voice calm but purposeful. Finally, it was my turn. Gravemore reached for my paper, and I felt my pulse quicken. My hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as I handed it over. Relax, Cecilia murmured, leaning closer. Before I could pull away, she grabbed my hand under the table. Her grip was firm, her touch unexpectedly warm. Don't be nervous, dumbass, she added in a whisper, her tone teasing but not unkind. I exhaled slowly, trying to let the tension drain from my body. Still, it was hard to shake the nervous energy buzzing in my veins. For some reason, I always felt on edge when my work was being judged, despite the fact that my work almost always turned out perfect. Gravemore began reading, his expression inscrutable. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one heavier than the last. Cecilia's hand was still on mine, but I barely registered it. My thoughts were spiraling. What if I missed a critical detail? What if he found an error in my mana flow diagrams? What if? Perfect work, Gravemore said suddenly, snapping me out of my thoughts. He set the paper down with a decisive thud. No changes needed. I blinked, my brain taking a moment to process his words. Perfect? I repeated, half in disbelief. Gravemore gave me a rare, approving nod. Yes, Arthur. Perfect. Your work is well thought out, clearly explained, and innovative. This paper alone could put you on the map in necromantic research. Excellent job. For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. Then, a wide grin spread across my face, and I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Cecilia let go of my hand, leaning back in her chair with a triumphant smirk. See? Told you, she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Rose offered a more understated congratulations, her smile warm. Well done, Arthur. Thank you, I said, my voice steady now. Both of you. We didn't do anything, Cecilia replied with a shrug, her crimson eyes glinting. You're a genius. Let your brilliance shine. For once, her words carried no teasing or sarcasm, just a quiet sincerity that caught me off guard. Let my brilliance shine, I thought, turning her words over in my mind. They weren't just words, they carried weight. Kindness wasn't something I often associated with Cecilia, but here she was, encouraging me in her own peculiar way. I felt a strange warmth in my chest, one I wasn't quite sure how to process. Soon, preparations for the Tower of Magic conference were well underway. I spent my days finalizing details for the presentation, cross-referencing notes, and occasionally pestering Professor Gravemore about the finer points of presenting in front of an audience of researchers. It wasn't until I ran into Rachel in the Ophelia Lounge that I realized not everyone shared my excitement for the conference. The Tower of Magic? Rachel's pout was so pronounced, I almost laughed. I would have done research too if it weren't being held there. Isn't that a bit dramatic? I asked, suppressing a grin. It's not dramatic, she retorted, crossing her arms. It's about principle. Do you know how many times the Tower of Magic has tried to poach people from my family? It's insulting. Maybe they just want the best? I offered innocently, earning myself a glare that could have melted steel. Don't you start, she said, wagging a finger at me. I'm proud of you, Arthur. I really am. But I won't set foot in that place unless it's to wage war on behalf of the Creighton family. I'll remember that the next time I need reinforcements, I teased. She rolled her eyes but smiled all the same. Just don't let those tower people corrupt you. You're too good for that place. Later, as I packed up my notes and materials, Serafina caught me in the hallway. She stood as composed as ever, her silver hair catching the light in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. You're leaving soon, she asked. In a few days, I confirmed. She nodded thoughtfully. Good luck, Arthur. The Tower of Magic is an important place. Make an impression. Her words, though sparse, carried the weight of her sincerity. I knew that coming from her, this was high praise. Thanks, Sarah, I said, using the nickname that still caught her off guard. She blinked but said nothing, merely inclining her head before walking away. And then, the day came. Professor Gravemore gathered Cecilia, Rose, and me in front of the warp gate. We were the only three from the junior section representing Mythos Academy this time around, as the other students were assigned to different batches or categories. You all ready? Gravemore asked, his deep voice cutting through the hum of the warp gate. Cecilia adjusted the strap of her bag, her usual air of confidence radiating from her like a shield. Always. Rose gave a soft nod, her calm demeanor as steady as ever. Yes, Professor. I glanced at the two of them before stepping forward. Let's do this. Chapter 155, Tower of Magic Conference, 1. The Tower of Magic loomed in the distance as we checked into our hotel. It wasn't just tall, it was overwhelming, a colossal needle threading through the heavens, its silhouette marked by a faint shimmer of magic that cloaked its top floors. Even from here, the sheer scale of it made me pause, taking a moment to marvel at the work of thousands who had built and maintained this monument to human ambition. Inside the hotel, however, the atmosphere was far less intimidating. Plush carpets muffled footsteps, crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow, and attendants moved with the precision of well-practiced spells. Mythos Academy spared no expense when it came to accommodations, but that wasn't surprising. After all, we were here as representatives, and even first-year representatives were expected to keep up appearances. Professor Gravemore handed us our keycards and gave a simple nod of dismissal. Rest up. The conference starts tomorrow, and the tour of the tower is in the afternoon. Revise your presentations if you feel the need, but I'd recommend relaxing tonight. Cecilia, carrying herself with her usual air of noble nonchalance, simply nodded. Rose offered Gravemore a polite thanks before the two headed for their rooms, leaving me to linger in the lobby. It was a grand space, all marble and glass, with an enormous fountain in the center that defied gravity with its floating streams of water. I found a seat near the corner, my mind buzzing not with nerves but with anticipation. For all the challenges I'd faced so far, standing in front of some of the most brilliant minds in the magical world tomorrow felt different. Exciting. But solitude never lasts long in places like this. Hey, Mythos kid, came a voice from behind me. Turning, I found myself face to face with a trio of older students. They wore the badges of academies I recognized, Starstrike Academy, Gravelore Academy, and Silverlight Institute. Second and third years, if the way they carried themselves was anything to go by. Didn't expect to see a first year here, the one from Starcrest said, a wiry boy with sandy hair and a sneer to match. His name tag read Adrian Wren. Mythos must really be scraping the bottom of the barrel if they're sending kids. That, or they're trying to show off, added the girl from Gravehold, her dark curls bouncing as she crossed her arms. Her tag read Danica Vale. Mythos always does love its dramatics. Or maybe it's because they don't trust their older students to win, said the last, a tall boy from Silverlight with sharp features. His name was Kalen Thorne, and his smirk was infuriatingly smug. I smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. If Mythos Academy is so unimpressive, then I assume none of you would ever dream of transferring there? Adrian blinked, clearly caught off guard. Well, that's not. Exactly, I interrupted smoothly. Because if they offered you a spot, you'd be packing your bags faster than you can say warp gate. Danica flushed. That's not the point. You don't even. I know exactly what the point is, I said, my voice calm but firm. You think poking fun at me makes you feel better about not being where I am. I get it. But if you have time to waste trying to rattle me, maybe you should spend it preparing your own presentations. Before any of them could respond, a new voice broke in. That's enough. The voice belonged to a girl with soft brown hair and striking violet eyes, her badge identifying her as Elara Astoria. She was flanked by another figure, a sharp-eyed girl with platinum white hair and an air of quiet authority. Her badge read Naomi Draven. Both of them wore the insignia of Slate Mark Academy. Bullying a first year to feel better about yourselves? Classy, Naomi said, crossing her arms as she stepped between me and Adrian. Adrian glared but said nothing, clearly caught off guard. Danica and Kaylin shuffled awkwardly, the bravado draining from their faces. It's not bullying, Danica muttered. We were just talking. Elara tilted her head, her gaze steady but not unkind. Funny, it didn't sound like talking. It sounded like envy. Kaylin bristled. Envy? Why would we? Save it, Naomi cut in, her voice carrying an edge that made even Kaylin fall silent. If you've got something to prove, do it in the conference. This isn't the place. The trio exchanged embarrassed looks before muttering excuses and retreating, Adrian muttering something under his breath that earned him a glare from Naomi as he left. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thanks, I said, turning to the two girls. I appreciate the backup. Naomi gave a casual shrug. Don't mention it. I can't stand idiots like that. Elara, however, was studying me now, her violet eyes narrowing slightly in thought. Wait. Arthur Nightingale, she said, her voice lilting with recognition. The one from Mythos Academy? I blinked in surprise. That's me. Her face brightened with a warm smile. I've heard about you. A first year taking on such an ambitious project, it's impressive. I wouldn't go that far, I said, scratching the back of my neck. I'm just doing my best. Elara extended her hand. I'm Elara Astoria. And this is Naomi Draven. Naomi gave me a nod. Good luck tomorrow. Not that you'll need it, if half of what I've heard is true. You too, I said, watching as they disappeared into the crowd. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Elara Astoria. She was here, flesh and blood, as real as the steady hum of magic thrumming through the air around us. In the novel, she'd been my favorite female character, the kind-hearted glue that held everyone together despite her limited screen time. Her untimely death had been one of the greatest tragedies of the story, one that I intended to prevent at all costs. But standing here now, having just met her, the weight of that responsibility pressed on me. Arthur, a familiar voice called out, dragging me from my thoughts. I turned to see Cecilia approaching, her usual confident swagger on full display. She wasn't wearing the Mythos Academy uniform, opting instead for a cropped top and a flowing skirt that made her seem casual. Somebody annoy you? She asked, raising an eyebrow as she reached me. No, just thinking, I replied, still distracted by my earlier encounter. Cecilia's eyes narrowed in mock suspicion before she smirked. Why are you still in uniform? You know we're not on campus, right? I glanced down at the familiar Mythos insignia stitched onto my blazer. Why aren't you wearing yours? Because we're free right now, duh, she shot back, rolling her eyes. Why wouldn't I wear something more comfortable? You look like you're still expecting to be called to Professor Nero's office. I opened my mouth to retort, but, annoyingly, she had a point. And don't I look pretty? Cecilia added with a teasing tilt of her head, her smile mischievous. I narrowed my eyes at her, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a response. She took my silence as victory, grinning even wider. Anyway, she continued, clearly enjoying herself, the upper year students want to meet you. Wait, the upper year students? I repeated, frowning. She nodded. Yeah, the integration rankers. You know, the ones who actually matter. Why? I asked, genuinely puzzled. Because you made a lich, duh, she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You've got, like, the magical equivalent of a flashing neon sign over your head that says, interesting first year. Now, come on. Let's not keep them waiting. Before I could protest, Cecilia grabbed my arm and started dragging me through the hotel with the kind of confidence that suggested she'd memorized the layout. I stumbled slightly as we wove through the lavish corridors, past towering crystal chandeliers and ornate carpets that probably cost more than most houses. She didn't slow down once, her grip firm and her pace relentless. "Do you even know where we're going?" I asked, trying, and failing, to wrest my arm free. "Obviously," she said with a scoff. "I'm not dragging you into a broom closet, Arthur. Have a little faith." I wasn't sure if I trusted her faith or her sense of direction, but before I could decide, we stopped in front of a massive, intricately carved door. Cecilia knocked, the sound echoing through the hallway. We waited in silence for a moment before the door creaked open. "I brought him here," Cecilia announced, her voice laced with mock irritation. "Happy now?" The figure who had opened the door stepped aside, allowing us to enter. I barely had time to register the sheer size of the suite before a wave of oppressive mana washed over me. Powerful presences. I froze instinctively, my senses sharpening as my gaze swept across the room. There were 5 of them, each seated casually on luxurious furniture that looked like it had been designed for royalty. And yet, despite their relaxed postures, the air around them hummed with restrained power. Integration rankers. All of them. It wasn't just their mana, though. Their eyes carried the weight of experience, the kind that only came from surviving countless battles and pushing through impossible odds. They weren't just students, they were warriors, scholars, and prodigies. I realized I was staring when one of them, a tall boy with sharp features and jet black hair, raised an eyebrow at me. "So this is the first year who made a lich," he said, his tone equal parts amused and skeptical. "That's him," Cecilia said, shoving me forward lightly. "Arthur Nightingale, the pride of Mythos Academy's Class 1A. The black-haired boy smirked, leaning back in his chair. "He doesn't look like much." "Neither did you," Cecilia shot back, crossing her arms. "And now you're pretending to be impressive." A ripple of laughter moved through the group, cutting through the tension. I exhaled quietly, taking the opportunity to steady myself. Whatever this was, I'd have to handle it carefully. "Well," another student said, a girl with piercing green eyes and an air of casual authority, "let's see if he's worth the hype." "Sit down. We don't bite." I nodded, stepping forward as Cecilia took a seat beside me. The room was suffused with a kind of charged energy, the kind that came from being surrounded by people who could crush you without breaking a sweat. This was going to be interesting. Chapter 156, Tower of Magic Conference, 2. The girl's emerald gaze locked onto me with an intensity that made my instincts hum with awareness. There was no hostility in her eyes, only sharp, analytical interest, the kind that weighed and measured with the precision of a master appraiser. Wait. My mind scrambled through my knowledge of Mythos Academy's upper years. Isn't she the student council president of the upper years? Luna's voice echoed in my head, cool and composed. She's a high integration ranker. My breath hitched slightly. A high integration ranker at Mythos Academy was no joke. That was a level of power most people never reached in their entire lifetimes. And yet, she stood before me, clad in a perfectly pressed Mythos uniform, her presence like an unsheathed blade, effortlessly sharp, naturally commanding. Rank 2 of the 5th years. Second only to the divine dragon of Mount Hua, a name whispered with reverence and caution. She was the kind of individual that shaped the balance of power in Mythos Academy, and now her attention was on me. "You're Arthur Nightingale," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, as if she were confirming an unavoidable truth. I met her gaze, resisting the urge to shift under its weight. "I am." She studied me for another long moment before speaking again. "I'm Valencia Drawl, student council president of the upper years." Ah. That confirmed it. Valencia Drawl. Not just an integration ranker, but one of the most powerful students in the entire academy. I kept my expression neutral. "It's an honor to meet you." She hummed, tilting her head slightly. I wonder. Do you know why I'm here, Arthur? I had a few ideas, none of them particularly comforting. Instead of guessing, I simply said, I assume you'll tell me. Valencia's small smile widened just a fraction. Smart. She folded her arms, looking me over once more before glancing toward the other upper years gathered around. You see, we upper years have been having an ongoing discussion about you. About me? I asked, keeping my tone even. Valencia tilted her head slightly, as if amused by my reaction. Then, with the weight of authority behind her words, she said, we want you to be the president for the lower years. I blinked. Once. Twice. I even glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out and tell me I'd misheard. Then, just to be sure, I pointed at myself. Me? A few of the upper year students smirked at my reaction, while others watched with unreadable expressions. Valencia, however, remained perfectly composed, her emerald gaze steady. Yes, you, she said simply. And before you ask why, let me explain. I crossed my arms, waiting. First, you're already the most prominent first year in the academy, she stated. Your achievements speak for themselves. You've created a lich. You reached white rank before the end of your first year. You're one of the strongest combatants in your year, and you're set to challenge Lucifer Windward in the Sovereign's tournament. She took a step forward, her presence filling the room like an approaching storm. In other words, whether you like it or not, you're already a leader. People are watching you, looking to you. You hold influence. Cecilia, who had been quiet until now, suddenly smirked. So basically, they want to put a leash on you. Valencia shot her a glance but didn't deny it. Not a leash. A position. You'll have a seat at the table, a say in decisions that affect the lower years. And more importantly, you'll gain the support of the student council, support that could be very useful in the coming years. I mulled over her words. There was no doubt that this was a strategic move on their part. The student council was composed mostly of 4th and 5th years, but they still needed someone to oversee the younger students. By offering me the role, they weren't just acknowledging my strength, they were integrating me into the academy's power structure. Clever. But also dangerous. What's the catch? I asked, because there was always a catch. Valencia's lips quirked. No catch. Just responsibilities. You'd have to mediate conflicts, represent the lower years in council discussions, and ensure that first, second and third years don't get left behind when policies are made. She paused, then added, oh, and if any issues arise between upper and lower years, you'd be expected to handle them. Ah. There it was. The real reason. This wasn't just about offering me a position, it was about controlling the narrative. If I was in charge of the lower years, then any unrest, any disputes between younger students and their seniors, would be my problem to deal with. Smart. Still, the benefits were undeniable. Influence, resources, information. And I'd get to see how the academy's power structure actually worked from the inside. I glanced at Cecilia, who was watching me with lazy amusement, and then at the other upper years, some of whom still seemed skeptical. Then I turned back to Valencia. I'll think about it. Of course, she said smoothly. Take your time. But don't take too long, the council needs an answer before the festival. With that, she gestured toward the door, signaling that the conversation was over. Cecilia and I exchanged a glance before leaving the suite. As soon as we were in the hallway, she let out a low whistle. You really are making waves, huh? President of the lower years? That's quite the offer. Offer or trap, I muttered. Cecilia grinned. Aren't they the same thing? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I need to think about this. You do that, she said, giving me a playful nudge. But if you ask me, you'd make a great tyrant, leader. I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smirking. This was going to be interesting. Also, you'll need a team, Cecilia added, tilting her head with a smirk. A president can't rule alone. A team? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Vice president, secretary, treasurer, at the very least, she listed off effortlessly. Unless you plan on handling all the paperwork yourself, which, knowing you, would drive you insane. And I suppose you want to be vice president? I asked dryly. Cecilia's smirk widened. Only if you make Rachel my secretary. I sighed, rubbing my temple. You just want to bully her, don't you? She gasped dramatically. What? Me? Bully precious Rachel? Arthur, I am offended. I gave her a flat look, and she dropped the act with a chuckle. Fine, maybe a little. But honestly, I wouldn't mind the position. You'd be terrible at handling all the social dynamics on your own. That was probably true. Before I could answer, she hooked her arm through mine, dragging me forward. Anyway, ready for tomorrow? Yeah, I replied, exhaling slowly. Time to stun them. Underscore 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 underscore. Cecilia was humming as she walked through the hotel corridors, her hands in the pockets of her stylish jacket. The anticipation of tomorrow's event had left her in a good mood, a pleasant little thrill running through her veins. Then she overheard something. A few familiar voices, snickering, whispering, about him. They bullied Arthur, huh? She murmured under her breath, the hum in her chest turning into something cold. Of course, Arthur was more than capable of dealing with them if he wanted. He probably didn't even consider it significant enough to retaliate. That was the problem with him. He let things go too easily. But Cecilia? She was petty as hell. She leaned against the wall, tilting her head slightly, eavesdropping without shame. Did you see the way he just smiled at us? One of them muttered. Like we weren't even worth his time. Of course he thinks that, another voice scoffed. Mythos students are all the same. Arrogant bastards. He's not just some Mythos student, the first one grumbled. He's the one who made a lich. You saw how everyone looked at him today. Yeah, but at the end of the day, he's just another overhyped first year. Let's see how he handles the actual conference. Cecilia's lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. She pushed off the wall and strolled into view, the clack of her heels making the small group of students freeze. Talking about Arthur, are we? She asked sweetly, resting her chin on her palm. The group tensed. One of them, a second year from another academy, stiffened as he recognized her. Princess Slatemark. Ah, so polite all of a sudden, she drawled. Funny, considering just a second ago you were slandering my friend. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop a few degrees. We weren't slandering him. Of course not, she cut him off, smiling. You were just whining, weren't you? Like little children upset that someone else is better than them. The boy flinched. The others averted their gazes. Cecilia took a step closer, lowering her voice just slightly. Arthur is too nice to deal with insignificant things like this, so I'll do it for him. Consider this a warning. Her smile sharpened, her crimson eyes glinting under the soft hotel lights. Because if you ever try to undermine him again, I won't be so kind. A long, uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Then, satisfied, Cecilia turned on her heel and walked away, her mood significantly improved. Because no one was allowed to touch what was hers. Perhaps she should teach them a lesson tomorrow. In the conference. Chapter 157, Tower of Magic Conference, 3. The Tower of Magic stood as a testament to human ambition, its sleek metallic frame reinforced with layers of intricate mana circuits. It wasn't just old, it was a fusion of centuries of research and modern technology, a powerhouse of magical innovation. As we entered through the main gates, the automatic security scanners whirred softly, running identification checks before letting us pass. The corridors were vast but efficient, with hovering drones carrying stacks of documents and enchanted screens displaying research schedules and conference announcements. Professor Gravemore led the way with his usual no-nonsense demeanor, while Cecilia and Rose flanked me on either side, their expressions casual but observant. The junior research hall was already bustling with students from various academies, all preparing their materials. Some were deep in last-minute adjustments, others reviewing their presentations with professors. As soon as we stepped in, I felt a shift. Students from other academies glanced up at me, then immediately looked away, almost too quickly, as if afraid to meet my gaze. My brow furrowed slightly. Since when did I inspire this kind of reaction? Then it hit me. Cecilia. I didn't need to look at her to confirm it, but I did anyway. Sure enough, she wore a self-satisfied smirk, her arms crossed in amusement. What did she do this time? I thought, but then decided against asking. If she wanted to gloat, she'd tell me eventually. For now, I had other things to focus on. The only ones who did meet my gaze were Elara and Naomi from Slate Mark Academy. Elara, ever warm, gave me a friendly wave, while Naomi simply nodded. I returned the gestures, appreciating the fact that at least someone in the room wasn't too scared to acknowledge me. Then, just as I was settling in, the atmosphere in the hall completely changed. A hush spread through the room as a group of figures entered from the far side. The judging panel had arrived. Murmurs broke out among the students, and I caught snippets of their conversations. What are they doing here? This isn't fair, we're just junior researchers. They're the worst possible panel, brutal, absolutely brutal. Cecilia, instead of looking concerned, simply grinned. I glanced at Rose, expecting some kind of reaction from her as well, but her expression was serious. I leaned in slightly. Who are they? I whispered. Rose exhaled, rubbing her temples. The most ruthless judges they could have assigned. They don't just reject research, they tear it apart. I arched a brow. And you're worried? Not for myself, she muttered, giving me a pointed look. I'm worried for the rest of the poor bastards in this hall. That was when the first presentation began. And within minutes, I saw exactly what Rose meant. One by one, students from lesser academies stepped forward, and one by one, they were completely shredded apart. Not a single judge held back. They dismissed theories, called methodologies flawed, and outright laughed at some conclusions. This is nonsense. I've seen primary school work with better structuring than this. This wouldn't pass even in a third-rate journal. The faces of the presenting students paled as they tried to stammer out rebuttals, but the judges were relentless. The room grew more and more tense, shoulders stiffening, expressions turning grim. Finally, after a long string of brutal rejections, a duo stepped forward. Elara and Naomi. Unlike the others, they looked confident. And for the first time that day, the judges actually listened. Elara and Naomi stood tall, their expressions poised despite the brutal environment. The tension in the room was palpable. After the previous presentations had been torn to shreds, no one expected the judges to be any kinder. Elara took a step forward first, her voice steady. Good morning. We are presenting our research on mana circuit stability in high-intensity spellcasting and its implications for multi-layered spell formations. Oh, a collaborative research paper, I thought. Naomi followed up smoothly, adjusting a holographic projection behind them. The problem we're addressing is the inefficiency caused by mana leakage when complex spells overlap. We propose an optimized channeling structure that minimizes interference. The judges watched in silence as they continued their presentation, their expressions unreadable. For the first time since the conference had begun, no interruptions. No dismissive remarks, no sarcastic chuckles. When they finished, a long pause followed. One of the judges, an elderly woman with piercing gray eyes, tapped a stylus against her data tablet before speaking. The theory itself is sound, she admitted, her voice devoid of condescension. Your calculations hold up, and your practical tests seem well documented. The other judges murmured among themselves before another spoke, an older man with thin glasses and a sharp tone. The research is competent. But it's not groundbreaking. That single sentence caused an entire shift in the room. Whispers broke out immediately. This was the kindest critique so far. They hadn't called it trash. Elara and Naomi, to their credit, took it well. They bowed politely, accepting the critique with grace. Thank you for your feedback, Elara said smoothly. We'll continue refining our work. The judges nodded. They had accepted the research. Not the highest praise, but considering the massacre that had taken place before, it was a monumental win. Naomi and Elara stepped down, relieved but composed, as the panel moved on. Then, the lead judge turned their gaze towards us. Next, she called. Mythos Academy. The room stiffened. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Me, Cecilia, and Rose. I stepped forward first, adjusting my posture. I wasn't nervous, far from it. But I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes drilling into me. I exhaled slowly. Time to shake things up. Rose stepped forward first, her expression composed, her presence unshaken by the ruthless panel in front of her. She tapped the console at her side, bringing up a holographic display of carefully laid out equations and diagrams. Good morning, she began, her voice calm and assured. My research focuses on mana circuit adaptability in artificial constructs, specifically optimizing energy pathways to improve efficiency in autonomous magical entities. There was a brief flicker of interest from the judges. Rose continued smoothly, her words precise. The current standard models for autonomous constructs, such as familiars and artificial golems, rely on fixed pathways for mana circulation. This creates issues when rapid energy shifts are required in battle or high-intensity scenarios. My approach proposes an adaptable circuit structure, one that adjusts mana flow based on external stimuli. She expanded the display, showcasing a side-by-side simulation. On the left, she gestured, is a traditional construct. Notice the delay in response when faced with unexpected environmental changes. The judges watched as the golem simulation stuttered for a brief second when hit with a sudden burst of opposing mana. Rose gestured to the right simulation. Now, here's my construct, equipped with an adaptive circuit. The second construct fluidly adjusted, seamlessly shifting its mana channels in response to interference. By integrating mana-responsive lattice structures, Rose concluded, I've achieved a 7% improvement in reaction time and a 5% increase in efficiency when compared to existing models. A moment of silence. Then, one of the judges nodded slightly. Not bad, he admitted. Another, a middle-aged man with deep-set eyes, adjusted his glasses. This is a reasonable improvement over current designs. There was no scorn, no outright dismissal, just critical assessment. Finally, the lead judge gave her evaluation. Your research is well-founded. Your methodology is solid. While the improvements are incremental rather than revolutionary, this is competent work. For this panel, that was high praise. Rose bowed slightly. Thank you for your feedback. She stepped back, her face unreadable, but I knew she was satisfied. Cecilia strode up to the presentation platform, radiating confidence, her smirk never wavering. Without hesitation, she tapped the console, and the display shifted. My research, she began, her voice as smooth as silk, is on theoretical and practical applications of an innate gift, witchcraft. Silence. Not the mocking silence that had met so many previous presenters, but an interested one. Gifts were inherently personal, bound to the soul of the individual. Researching one's own gift? That was completely uncharted territory. The lead judge raised a brow, clearly intrigued but wary. A study on your own gift, she mused. That's a first. Cecilia's smirk widened. Then I'll be the first to publish a formal analysis. She snapped her fingers, and an ethereal glow surrounded her hands. Unlike conventional spell casting, this wasn't mana, at least, not in the way most mages understood it. My gift, Cecilia continued, is what the scholars have dubbed witchcraft, a phenomenon that allows me to rewrite the very structure of spells in real time. Unlike traditional magic that requires careful preformulation, I can manipulate spells mid-cast, altering their properties on the fly. She waved her hand, and a small flickering ember appeared in front of her, floating gently in the air. A standard fire spell, she said. Then, before anyone could react, the ember changed. The air distorted, and suddenly, the flickering flame froze solid, shifting from fire to ice without breaking, without a spell recast, without any transition rune or external influence. A few researchers leaned forward, now fully invested. Cecilia smirked, enjoying their attention. For most mages, a spell is a completed circuit, locked in its nature the moment it's cast. Mine, however. She clenched her fist. The frozen ember shattered, dispersing into glowing particles before reforming into a tendril of electricity that crackled along her fingers. Is mutable. A judge actually sat up straight, eyes glinting with pure fascination. You can overwrite elemental composition mid-cast? Not just elemental composition, Cecilia corrected, clearly savoring the moment. I can alter casting speed, spell trajectory, and even partially reconstruct the runic matrix, though that part requires extreme precision. The murmurs exploded across the room. Spell structures were rigid. A completed spell could not be altered once cast, that was an absolute rule of magic. And yet, Cecilia had broken that rule. One of the researchers, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, stared at her as if she were a living treasure trove. This is astonishing. If fully documented, this could redefine how we classify innate gifts. The lead judge, who had been ruthlessly shredding most of the previous research papers, nodded approvingly. Your research has no practical application for anyone but yourself, she said. But that's precisely why it's valuable. Another judge chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. For years, we've been attempting to understand gifts, but they refuse to conform to standardized magical theory. What you've done here is magnificent. Cecilia tilted her head. So? The lead judge finally gave a pleased nod. Accepted. Without question. Cecilia beamed, her crimson eyes glowing with satisfaction. For once, even the researchers who usually dismissed unique cases as anomalies were eagerly discussing her work. She turned back to me with a smirk, as if to say, top that. And now, as all eyes landed on me, I finally stepped forward. The judge's voice rang out. Arthur Nightingale. You're next. The room fell silent. Now, it was my turn. Chapter 158, Tower of Magic Conference, 4. I stepped forward, the weight of the moment settling over me like a cloak. The judges, who had been ruthless in their critiques thus far, watched with a mix of expectation and skepticism. The presentation console flickered to life as I placed my hand on it, revealing the title of my research. Optimizing the tri-binding process, a new method for lich creation. Silence. Then a few unimpressed expressions. I expected that. The method of lich creation has remained largely unchanged for centuries, I began, voice steady. It has been refined, but never redefined. The process is straightforward, establishing the three aspects of the lich, body, mind, and soul, and connecting them through mana thread harmonization. I tapped the console, and a holographic diagram of the conventional tri-binding method appeared, showcasing the usual method of threading mana channels between the skeleton, body, skull, mind, and source, soul. This is the current standard. It works. It has no drawbacks. But, I let the word hang in the air, just because something works does not mean it can't be improved. A subtle shift in the room. Now I had their attention. I adjusted the display, and a new model appeared. This one wasn't drastically different, but the difference was there, elegant in its efficiency. The Nightingale binding method reduces mana waste by 21.4%. Increases stability of the binding process, ensuring better long-term cohesion. Enhances response synchronization, making the lich's reactions more fluid. More murmurs. One of the judges, an older man with thin spectacles, narrowed his eyes. This isn't changing the method. It's just improving efficiency. I nodded. Exactly. The traditional method isn't wrong, but my method is simply better. More efficient, more stable, and more controllable. A judge with silver-rimmed glasses leaned forward slightly, intrigued. You're claiming a 21.4% reduction in mana waste? That's absurdly specific. How did you measure that? I flicked my wrist, and another display popped up, showing data logs from my own experimentations. The numbers come from extensive trials, I explained. I've taken standard binding sequences and restructured them, using a more fluid approach to mana thread harmonization. By adjusting the thread density and flow control, the binding process adapts to the unique characteristics of the materials used, rather than forcing all sources to conform to a rigid, pre-designed framework. I could see realization dawning in some of their eyes. They got it. This wasn't reinventing the wheel. It was making the wheel roll smoother. The process of creating a lich is delicate, I continued, and slight inefficiencies can compound. The energy needed to stabilize the tri-binding process is always the highest cost. My method reduces that strain without altering the fundamental process. One of the stricter judges scoffed. That's all well and good in theory, but without practical application. I've already applied it, I cut in smoothly, adjusting the display to show a log of my completed experiment. The screen flickered, showing the harmonization graphs. The data speaks for itself, I said, stepping back. The silver-rimmed judge laughed softly, shaking her head. This level of refinement, this is the kind of thing we see in the senior research panel. Not in the junior section. The older man with spectacles adjusted them, rereading my numbers. His lips pressed together. You've essentially created a superior version of the current process. I nodded. The lead judge, who had torn apart every other presentation, finally spoke, her voice composed but filled with weight. Your research has changed the fundamental understanding of necromantic construction. Then she sighed, rubbing her temples. As much as I hate to say it, we're going to have to forward this directly to the senior research panel. A ripple of shock passed through the hall. This was unprecedented. My submission had skipped past the junior section entirely. I had bypassed the intended level and been pushed up to the main research discussion. The lead judge let out a slow breath, before giving the final verdict. Accepted. Without question. Applause erupted. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of that moment sink in. Cecilia leaned in, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. Damn, Nightingale. You really do love ruining expectations, don't you? I just smiled, stepping down from the podium, my mind still processing everything. Well done, Arthur, Professor Gravemore said, his voice carrying a rare note of pride. As expected, your research is exceptional. The Tower of Magic will be desperate to get their hands on it. After all, it allows them to propel necromantic research forward, maybe even close the gap with the Ebony Tower of the Western Continent. I nodded, but deep down, my heart was pounding. The problem wasn't the success. It was how I'd achieved it. I had no memory of the moment I figured out the new tri-binding method. The recollection was simply gone, as if it had been plucked from my mind. And it wasn't just that. I had done more than refine an existing process. I had changed the fundamental nature of the source itself. I had somehow elevated the basilisk's soul, an impossible feat, turning my lich into an ancient undead, a true sentient being rather than just an advanced construct. A feat that should have been impossible. A feat that had only ever existed in theory. Only Professor Gravemore and I knew this. And even he didn't understand how I had done it. I exhaled slowly, keeping my expression neutral as I turned to Cecilia. "Cecilia," I whispered, my tone accusatory. She smirked, already knowing where I was going with this. "What? Did you have to bully the other students like this?" I asked, voice flat. Her smirk widened. "Absolutely." I sighed. "You stacked the judges, didn't you?" "What do you mean?" she said, tilting her head, playing innocent. I narrowed my eyes. "You used your influence to get the harshest, most cutthroat panel possible." "Of course I did," she said, laughing. "Did you see their faces when their research got shredded? It was hilarious." I groaned. "You're unbelievable." "And," she continued, completely ignoring me, "now that your research was deemed worthy, it was automatically submitted to the senior conference because of the stacked judge panel." That made me pause. Cecilia's smirk deepened. "You know who oversees the senior conference?" I didn't answer, but my mind was already racing. "The Tower Master," Cecilia revealed, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "The strongest spellcaster in the world. Archmage Charlotte Alaric." I gulped. Archmage Charlotte Alaric. The pinnacle of human spellcasting. Rank 3 in the world. The woman who had rewritten half of the modern magical theories that we studied today. The Tower Master herself would now be reading my work. Cecilia stepped closer, her expression turning serious. "This is important for you, Arthur," she said quietly. "She may not be a necromancer or a dark mage, but she still has interest in those fields. And what you've done here? It changes things. Not just for you. For the entire field of necromancy." I didn't respond immediately, my thoughts churning. Because she was right. This was far bigger than just an academic exercise. This was exposure. This was a direct invitation into the eyes of the most powerful mages in the world. And, more importantly, Cecilia's voice dropped lower, her smile fading. "You realize what this means, don't you?" I met her gaze. "In the future," she said, her crimson eyes gleaming, "even the Ebony Tower and the West will be after your research." I clenched my jaw. She was right. Chapter 159, Tower of Magic Conference, 5. Charlotte Alaric sighed dramatically, slumping against the plush chair in her office. The ceiling-high digital interface in front of her displayed the top-tier research papers from the senior conference, the supposed best of the best. And yet. "Boring," she drawled, tossing a conjured ball of light into the air, watching it spin lazily before vanishing into a wisp of energy. Her emerald-green eyes flicked from one paper to the next, each carrying prestigious names and impressive technicalities, but zero true excitement. Derivation of the seventh circle and its theoretical expansion. Yawn. Stabilization of advanced multi-elemental convergences. Didn't someone submit that last year? High-efficiency spatial displacement in combat environments. She wrote a better version of that when she was 18. She stretched her arms, already half ready to call it quits. The only reason she was even reading these was because her secretary insisted. "You have to pick at least one, Master Alaric," her secretary had nagged earlier that day. "It's important for the tower's future." As if any of these dull, by-the-book academics could shake the magical world. Then, something caught her eye. Her gaze landed on a paper categorized under Junior Conference, a submission so out of place among the seniors that she almost ignored it. Almost. She tilted her head, curiosity piqued. "What's this doing here?" The title was deceptively simple. Optimizing the tri-binding process, a new method for lich creation. She blinked. Then, she read. Her fingers drummed against the sleek desk as her eyes rapidly scanned through the content. Slowly, the casual boredom slipped away from her face. Her green eyes narrowed. Then widened. Then widened even more. By the time she reached the end, she was sitting upright, her lips parting slightly. This wasn't just a minor improvement. It wasn't some young necromancer figuring out how to tighten mana control. This was a revolution in how the very foundation of necromantic constructs was assembled. And it was written by a first year. At Mythos Academy, of all places. Arthur Nightingale, she murmured, tapping her desk to pull up a live feed of conference participants. A list of names hovered in front of her, sorted by sections. With a flick of her fingers, she navigated to the junior section. And there he was. A black-haired boy with calm, piercing eyes. "Found you," she whispered, her lips curling into an intrigued smile. Then, without hesitation, she vanished. A shift in space. An axis bent. And then she was gone. Underscore 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 underscore. The evening had settled comfortably, casting a quiet glow over the high-rise hotel overlooking the heart of Avalon. I sat on the couch, tossing a snack into my mouth while Rose and Cecilia sat across from me. "I mean, I still can't believe you submitted a paper on yourself, Cecilia," I sighed, stirring my tea. "That's peak arrogance." "And they loved it," Cecilia replied smugly, lounging back against the cushions. "Because I'm interesting, unlike whatever nonsense those other losers submitted." I shook my head. "You literally wrote about how amazing your own gift was. And they accepted it." Cecilia grinned, twirling a strand of golden hair. "Seems like my existence is research-worthy. Must be hard for you commoners." Before I could respond, a violent surge of space mana ripped through the room. A tear in the air. A high-level teleportation. Before any of us could react, a red-haired woman materialized in the center of the suite. Rose froze mid-sip. Cecilia's smirk vanished. Because standing before us, with the casual ease of someone who didn't need to knock, was Charlotte Alaric, Archmage and Tower Master of the Tower of Magic. For a single second, my brain didn't register what just happened. Then, I blinked. I had read about her. Oh. Damn. Master. Both Rose and Cecilia shot up from their seats, their voices overlapping in shocked unison. The red-haired Archmage simply waved a hand, a lazy, amused gesture as if she had just dropped by for tea instead of violating every security measure in the hotel with an instant teleportation. "Oh, hello, been a while, hasn't it?" Charlotte drawled, green eyes sweeping over both of them. But her gaze lingered just a fraction longer on Cecilia, a knowing glint behind her smile. Officially, only Cecilia was her disciple, the one who had passed whatever trials Charlotte had devised. Rose had failed. Yet, judging by the way Charlotte simply acknowledged her presence without a second thought, Rose had clearly received her teachings anyway. Interesting. But right now, the real problem was that one of the strongest alive was looking directly at me with the bright, burning curiosity of someone who had just found her next favorite research project. And that was never a good thing. "Wow, you really are something, aren't you?" she murmured, stepping closer, her gaze sweeping over me like I was some rare anomaly she had to dissect for the sake of magical advancement. A shiver crawled down my spine. 15 years old. White star. Black star. White core, 2, she listed, tapping her fingers against her arm. Then, her brows furrowed slightly, and something like genuine surprise flickered across her features. And, what the hell? Balanced in both mind and body aspects, she muttered, rubbing her chin before sighing. Talent really is unfair, huh? I had the sudden, overwhelming urge to take a step back. I did not like where this was going. Cecilia apparently sensed it too because she suddenly moved in front of me, blocking Charlotte's line of sight. Master, what exactly are you doing here? Cecilia asked, her tone firm. Charlotte blinked at her like a cat caught in mischief. Oh. She tilted her head, amusement dancing across her face. I just wanted to meet the person I decided to sponsor. Silence. I felt both Rose and Cecilia stiffen at the same time. And I stared at her. Wait. What? Wait, Master, what are you talking about? Cecilia's voice cut through the room, sharp with urgency. Charlotte simply smirked, crossing her arms as she leaned against the nearest wall with the kind of ease only a person who outranked everyone present by a ridiculous margin could have. I chose Arthur's paper, of course, she said, her tone light, as if she hadn't just dropped a bomb in the middle of the conversation. Cecilia and Rose froze. It is the best by far, Charlotte continued, her green eyes gleaming. And thus, I sponsor Arthur Nightingale. I blinked. Once. Twice. Wait. Sponsor me? I repeated, because I was pretty sure I had hallucinated that sentence. Oh, I guess you don't know, Charlotte mused, tapping her chin. There's this new program where the Tower Master, aka me, chooses a promising talent in the research world and sponsors them. And that talent, this time, is you. You. She pointed at me like I was some shiny artifact she had just found in the rubble of academia. So congratulations, you're now my personal research project. Cecilia's eyes widened in disbelief, while Rose just gaped, her brain clearly short-circuiting as she processed the fact that the most powerful spellcaster in the world had just claimed me as her personal student. Charlotte, apparently having the time of her life, continued. Of course, this doesn't just mean financial backing, she said, waving a hand. Money's easy. What you need is access. Resources. People. A place where you can push the boundaries of your field without being slowed down by red tape and bureaucratic nonsense. She leaned forward, grinning. For future research, you'll do it in the Tower of Magic itself. I barely had time to process the insane weight of those words before she delivered the final blow. And you are now my next disciple. Silence. A long, awkward, deafening silence. My brain stalled. Arthur, accept this. Luna's voice cut through my mental fog. This girl, she's more abnormal than that king of the north. I didn't even know what that meant, but I trusted Luna's instincts far too much to ignore her advice. And, honestly, what was I going to do? Say no to Charlotte Alaric? I accept, I said. Wonderful. Charlotte beamed. Summer break, you're coming to the Tower of Magic. I'll treat you well. She winked. Then, as if she hadn't just flipped my entire life upside down, she warped out of existence, vanishing into thin air. The room remained dead silent for a solid 10 seconds. Then, finally, Cecilia chuckled, shaking her head. Well, at least we're spending summer together, she said. Chapter 160, Prelude to End of the Year Festival, 1. The Tower of Magic conference had concluded, but its echoes reverberated across the world like a seismic event. The headlines were everywhere. Arthur Nightingale, chosen by Archmage Charlotte Alaric. A junior conference paper surpasses senior-level research. Tower of Magic's newest protégé, a rising star or a stolen talent? Rachel scowled at her phone, her sapphire eyes darkening as she read through the articles. Every single one of them boasted about the tower, about how they had discovered a rare, unprecedented genius. As if they had nurtured him. As if they had any right to him. Her shoulders twitched, her grip on the device tightening. TCH. A low, irritated click of the tongue escaped her lips. How dare they try to steal him away, she whispered, her voice trembling with quiet fury. Because that's exactly what this was. The Tower of Magic, the institution that had spent centuries trying to rival her family, had latched onto Arthur like leeches. They would shower him with resources, claim him as their own, parade him around like a trophy. She knew who was behind this. Her gaze turned cold as she muttered a single name. Cecilia. Because, of course, it was Cecilia Slatemark. Princess of the Slatemark Empire. The Tower Master's personal disciple. Rachel exhaled sharply, forcing herself to remain calm. She needed to talk to him. Before he got too deep into this. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she strode toward the elevator, her mind set. The moment she stepped into the lobby, it was as if fate had aligned itself perfectly. The doors to the warp gate room slid open, and Arthur walked in. And, of course, Cecilia was beside him. Rachel's eyes flickered to the princess, her irritation flaring up at the smug tilt of Cecilia's lips. "Hey, Ratch," Arthur greeted, his tone warm but casual. Rachel didn't answer. She simply stepped forward, her arms opening. Before Arthur could even react, she wrapped her arms around him, pulling him into a hug. Arthur stiffened for a second before relenting, his arms circling her waist as he patted her back. "Ratch?" he muttered, confused. Rachel buried her face into his shoulder for a brief moment, inhaling his familiar scent before she finally pulled away, her expression now firm and serious. "Arthur," she said, her voice clear and direct, "are you really going to the Tower of Magic?" Arthur's brows furrowed slightly, as if the question caught him off guard. "Well, I can't really pass up an opportunity like that," he admitted. Rachel's jaw clenched. She knew he was right. It was the logical choice. It was a golden opportunity. Even her father, King Alastair Creighton himself, while acknowledging Arthur's potential, hadn't given him such an offer. But that wasn't the point. "We are better," Rachel said, her voice laced with conviction as she looked him dead in the eye. "We are better than those idiots at the tower." A soft chuckle interrupted them. Rachel turned her gaze, and sure enough, Cecilia was standing there, arms folded, a smug smirk playing at her lips. Hey, don't be so arrogant, Ray," Cecilia teased, tilting her head mockingly. "The tower isn't so bad." Rachel's eyes narrowed dangerously. Arthur sighed, watching the tension crackle between them like a live wire. And just like that, another battle between Creighton and Slatemark had begun. Rachel's sapphire eyes glowed with a quiet fire as she crossed her arms. Everyone knows Creighton mages are above the Tower of Magic's mages. Cecilia, lounging with her usual smug ease, merely shrugged. Perhaps. But the Tower Master is stronger than the King of Creighton, isn't she? Her crimson eyes gleamed with amusement. The next generation will surpass the Creightons. Rachel scoffed. Not as long as I am the next generation. Golden light unfurled from her body like a blooming sun, crackling with divine authority. Cecilia smirked. Nah, it will. A scarlet glow erupted from her in turn, rich and potent, witchcraft laced into every particle of mana she released. Saintess and witch. Order and chaos. The two opposing forces clashed in the Ophelia dorm lounge, rippling against each other with terrifying intensity. For a split second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, silver light descended upon them. The golden and crimson auras didn't simply disperse. They were crushed. Rachel's eyes widened as her gift, her light mana, was suppressed as if it were nothing but an afterthought. Cecilia, always full of bravado, stiffened, her usual smirk faltering. And at the center of it all stood Arthur. Expression blank, hand raised, as though he had merely swatted away an annoying fly. Rachel inhaled sharply. This wasn't just mana. This was authority. A force neither holy nor cursed, neither saintly nor witchcraft. It was something different, something overwhelming. Only then did she fully process it. Arthur had stopped them. Effortlessly. It's absurd, Rachel thought, her fingers curling slightly at her side. She remembered. Back during their first practical evaluation, Arthur had been weak. Not incompetent, but helpless. He couldn't interfere when she fought Cecilia back then, he could only watch. And now? Now he was above them. Rachel exhaled, pushing her shock away. All right. You made your point, she muttered, brushing a hand through her hair as she took a step back. Cecilia, ever shameless, recovered quickly. Tisk, she clicked her tongue, placing a hand on her hip. You could have just said, stop, instead of flexing, you know. Arthur sighed, lowering his hand. You wouldn't have listened. Cecilia grinned. True. Rachel gave Arthur one last glance. His silver light had faded, but the weight of it lingered in the air. She clenched her fists slightly, feeling a strange mix of admiration and frustration swirl inside her. Because whether she liked it or not, Arthur Nightingale was no longer someone who needed her protection. And that changed everything. Rachel stared at him, her heart pounding louder than she cared to admit. Ratch, I'm not going to be tied down to anything, Arthur said, his blue eyes steady as they met hers. I accepted the offer from the Tower of Magic because it will make me stronger. That's all there is to it. She exhaled slowly, searching his face for something, anything, that would tell her more than just his words. So you don't care about the tower, she asked, voice quieter than she intended. Arthur nodded without hesitation. A flicker of something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to relief, spread through her chest. Then what do you care about? Cecilia's voice cut through the moment, softer than usual. Arthur turned his gaze to her. And then, without hesitation, he spoke. You too. Silence. Rachel felt the weight of the words settle deep in her bones. Cecilia, standing beside her, had gone still, her usual smirk absent, her crimson eyes searching Arthur's for something she couldn't name. I care about both of you, Arthur repeated, and this time, his voice carried an undeniable certainty. And so, I'll do it. 1 month from now, against Lucifer, I'll win. Rachel's breath caught. Cecilia's fingers twitched. Arthur stepped forward, closing the space between them, his presence undeniable. And when I do, he continued, his voice steady, unshakable, be there. Not as the Princess of Creighton, not as the Princess of Slatemark. His azure gaze locked onto theirs, something raw and unfiltered flickering beneath the surface. Just as Rachel and Cecilia. No royal titles. No noble responsibilities. No politics. Just them. A quiet hum filled the space between them, a tension that was not uncomfortable, but undeniably there. Rachel swallowed. She had no response, no clever retort. Cecilia, for once, had nothing to tease. Arthur just was, standing before them, waiting. And neither of them knew what to do with it.